What if the ancient world wasn't a clear lineage of progress, but a graveyard of vanished cities? Quiet, deliberate, unnervingly clean. Behind the polished museum glass, beneath the dunes and jungle loam, lingered networks of roads without rulers, scripts without voices, temples without names. We were taught a simple story: rise, flourish, fall. The records say otherwise. Clay tablets cut off mid-sentence, palaces emptied with no bodies, canals silted shut as if on cue. Architects walked off the stage, and no one wrote where they went. These aren't rumors. They are radiocarbon dates, pollen charts, stratigraphy, and stone. They smell like wet earth and burned timber. They sound like wind moving through empty courtyards. The official history is tidy. The evidence is not. Tonight we dig beneath the sand, the salt flats, the monsoon forests, and the ruins scrubbed clean by time, to unearth 30 real ancient civilizations that vanished without a trace. This isn't a scandal, it's a pattern. Welcome to 30 Lost Ancient Civilizations That Vanished Without a Trace. This isn't a highlight reel, it's a forensic map of disappearance. If you're into history's dark seams, undeciphered scripts, collapsed water empires, cities erased by weather and policy, subscribe. New episodes dive where textbooks won't. Tell me in the comments, where are you watching from, and what time is it? Midnight in Manchester, sunrise in Sydney, 2:17 a.m. in Nairobi with the volume low? You're in the right room. We're starting in the Indus heat, then cutting across the Black Sea, the Andes, the Sahara. 30 vanishings, one systemic pattern. Let's begin. The heat rises in waves off the baked brick. Monsoon clouds gather on the horizon, but haven't broken yet. Below your feet, a drain runs at a perfect gradient, whispering water through terracotta pipes laid in straight lines that would make a Roman engineer weep. The streets meet at right angles. Every brick, every single one, conforms to a 4.2.1 ratio. Someone measured, someone cared. This is Mohenjo-Daro, circa 2500 BCE, one of the largest Bronze Age cities on Earth. And it's about to disappear. The official narrative calls the Indus Valley civilization peaceful, orderly, a Bronze Age utopia stretching across what is now Pakistan and northwest India, encompassing perhaps 5 million people at its height. Cities like Harappa, Mohenjo-Daro, Dholavira, Rakhigarhi, these weren't villages. They were urban centers with populations in the tens of thousands, equipped with sophisticated drainage systems, public baths, granaries, and standardized weights and measures that suggest centralized planning on a staggering scale. No pyramids, no ziggurats, no obvious palaces or temples with god-kings staring down from walls. Just cleanliness, order, and an undeciphered script that refuses after a century of scholarship to tell us anything. And then, sometime after 1900 BCE, it all stops. Not with a bang, with a slow unraveling. The great cities contract. Outlying settlements are abandoned. The standardized brick ratios slip. The careful urban planning gives way to cramped, makeshift structures built inside the shells of older, grander buildings. By 1300 BCE, the entire civilization has melted away, leaving behind only ruins and questions. The dark reveal isn't dramatic. It's the absence of drama. There are no mass graves, no layers of ash suggesting citywide conflagrations, no fortification walls battered down by invaders. The Indus people didn't fight to the last defender. They left. Archaeologists have proposed climate change. Oxygen isotope analysis from speleothems and lake cores suggests a weakening of the summer monsoon around 2200 to 1900 BCE. The Gagar-Hakra river system, which may be the legendary Sarasvati mentioned in Vedic texts, appears to have dried up or shifted course. Faunal remains show a dietary shift from large game to smaller animals and more intensive agriculture. The cities built their empires on water, and the water moved. But here's what unsettles: the clean exit. At the beadmaker's workshop in Mohenjo-Daro, carnelian beads sit unstrung, half-finished. Children's toys, little clay carts with wheels that still turn, lie scattered in alleyways. A water stairway descending to the Great Bath is slick with mineral salts deposited over centuries of disuse. People left mid-task, as if stepping out for lunch and never returning. And that script. Over 4,000 inscribed objects, seals, pottery, tablets, bearing some 400 to 600 distinct signs. It could be logographic, syllabic, or something else entirely. We don't know. The inscriptions are short, typically 5 to 6 signs, suggesting names, titles, or simple administrative notations. But without a bilingual text like the Rosetta Stone, without a long narrative inscription, the language remains silent. The seals themselves are masterworks. A unicorn bull rendered in profile, its body rippling with stylized power, a zebu with decorative collar, a seated figure in what might be a yogic posture, surrounded by animals. These were pressed into clay to mark goods, to seal storage jars, to authenticate transactions. An economic system hummed along these trade routes: lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, copper from Rajasthan, timber from the Himalayas. And then the system powered down. Recent excavations at Rakhigarhi, using strontium isotope analysis of skeletal remains, show that even during the civilization's height, there was significant mobility. People moved between cities. They married across regions. The genetic data reveals continuity with modern South Asian populations, suggesting that the Indus people didn't vanish biologically. They dispersed, intermingled, and their urban identity dissolved into something else. But that's the puzzle. A civilization of this scale, this sophistication, this obsessive standardization, doesn't just decentralize overnight. The abandonment of Mohenjo-Daro took generations, maybe centuries, as the city went from thriving metropolis to hollow shell. The upper city, with its citadel and great bath, was abandoned before the lower residential areas. The elite left first. Walk through the ruins today, and you can still see it. The precision, the planning, the care for public health and sanitation that wouldn't be matched in many parts of the world for thousands of years. And then, quiet. The wind through empty streets. Brick walls slowly collapsing, sand drifting through open doorways. The Indus Valley civilization is a masterclass in disappearance. Not erased by conquest, not destroyed by catastrophe, just phased out. The people survived, the culture didn't. And nobody thought to write down why. The clean exit isn't unique. The next culture times its endings with fire, on purpose. Picture this: spiral towns on low hills in what is now Ukraine, Moldova, and Romania. Houses arranged in concentric rings around a central plaza. Ovens still radiating warmth. Painted ceramics cooling in the evening air. Population estimates for some settlements reach 15,000 people. This is 4,000 BCE, when most of Europe lived in hamlets of a few dozen souls. These are among the largest human settlements on Earth at this time, and every 60 to 80 years, they burn them down. The official narrative calls the Kukatini Tripilia culture a Neolithic farming society. Sophisticated for their time, sure, with elaborate painted pottery and copper metallurgy. But Neolithic farmers doesn't capture the strangeness. These people built some of the largest prehistoric settlements in Europe, settlements that dwarf contemporary Mesopotamian cities, and then ritually destroyed them. The dark reveal lives in those burn layers, thick deposits of ash, charcoal, and vitrified clay. Clay heated so intensely it fused into glass. Archaeologists call these remains ploshchadki, and they're everywhere. The burning was systematic, deliberate. The fires were hot enough to collapse structures completely, creating layers of fired clay daub that preserved the imprint of woven walls and wooden support posts. Imagine standing in one of these settlements on burning day. The houses are wattle and daub constructions, wooden frameworks woven with branches, plastered with clay mixed with chaff and dung. They've stood for decades. Children were born in these rooms. Families celebrated harvests around these hearths. Potters shaped vessels that would become heirlooms. And then, at some predetermined moment, perhaps dictated by calendrical cycles, perhaps by political decision, perhaps by accumulated spiritual necessity, everyone evacuates. The fires are set simultaneously, not one house catching and spreading, all of them. Coordinated, intentional. Temperatures reach 800, 1,000 degrees Celsius, hot enough that the clay walls don't just burn, they vitrify. They turn to a glass-like substance, preserving negative impressions of the organic materials that burned away. Archaeologists excavating these sites find daub with wood grains still visible, pressed into the surface like fossils. Magnetic susceptibility studies and archaeomagnetic analysis confirm it. These weren't accidental fires or raids. The conflagrations were planned. The magnetic minerals in the heated clay align with Earth's magnetic field at the moment of burning, creating a permanent record of the fire's intensity and timing. Multiple houses show identical magnetic signatures. They burned together, not sequentially. Some researchers suggest the burning was part of a cultural cycle. Build, inhabit, burn, move a few kilometers away, rebuild. A regeneration ritual, perhaps, timed to generational turnover. When the founding generation died, the village died with them, consumed by flames that released it from profane existence. Or maybe it was practical, a response to accumulated filth, vermin, and disease that medieval Europeans would have understood all too well. Or agricultural, a way to release nutrients back into the soil, clearing land for new fields, while the old settlement site lay fallow. The pottery tells stories of aesthetics and identity. Cucuteni tripilia ceramics are painted with elaborate spiral and curvilinear designs in black, red, and white. Some vessels reach a meter in height. The clay is fine, the firing controlled, the decoration obsessive in its complexity. These aren't just cooking pots, they're statements of skill, of cultural belonging, of connection to ancestors who painted similar spirals on similar vessels in similar settlements. Copperworking adds another layer. These people were smelting and casting copper tools and ornaments, axes, awls, fish hooks, beads. The technology required specialized knowledge, controlled heat, and access to ore sources. Some settlements show evidence of craft specialization, neighborhoods where metalworking dominated, zones where pottery production concentrated. This is social complexity, division of labor, trade networks spanning hundreds of kilometers. But here's the thing. The cycle stops. Around 3000 BCE, the mega-settlements end. The population contracts. The elaborate painted pottery traditions fade. The Cucuteni tripilia culture doesn't burn and rebuild anymore. It just fades. Paleoclimate data from pollen cores and lake sediments suggest a period of increased aridity and cooling, the so-called 4.2 kiloyear event that disrupted societies across Eurasia. Stable isotope analysis of human remains indicates dietary stress. Carbon and nitrogen ratios in bone collagen shift, showing dietary changes consistent with crop failures or reduced meat consumption. The elaborate settlements, which required intensive agriculture to support their populations, became unsustainable. There's also evidence of contact and conflict with steppe pastoralists from the east. These were the early Indo-European speakers, mobile groups with horses and wagons, and a very different social structure. They lived in smaller, more dispersed settlements. They emphasized mobility over monumentality. They buried their elite in kurgans, earthen mounds, rather than burning their houses. Ancient DNA studies show genetic turnover in the region during this period. The Cucuteni tripilia people didn't vanish completely. Their genes persist in modern populations, but their distinctive culture, with its massive settlements and regenerative fires, ended. The final burns weren't followed by rebuilding. That's the signature of collapse. The ritual that had sustained the culture for over 1,000 years, build, burn, rebuild, broke down. When the environmental and social pressures became too great, there was no fifth act, just exodus. Walk through the archaeological sites today and you'll find soot on loom weights, blackened and preserved by the final fire. A stylized goddess figurine, cradled in ash, her painted features still visible, grains charred to glass, frozen mid-harvest, clay spindle whorls, half-worked flint tools, ceramic vessels toppled and shattered. The last generation didn't burn and rebuild, they burned and left. Excavations at Maidanetsiki, one of the largest tripilia settlements, reveal a town covering 250 hectares with potentially 3,000 houses. Geophysical surveys using magnetometry show the concentric arrangement clearly, rings within rings, a planned community on a scale that wouldn't be matched in Europe for thousands of years. And then, Around 3700 BCE, it burns. The next phase is smaller, less organized. The rings break apart. Houses are built haphazardly, without the geometric precision of earlier generations. By 3000 BCE, the site is abandoned entirely. Radiocarbon dates from multiple sites show the same chronology. The peak of mega-settlement construction occurs between 4100 3600 BCE. Decline begins around 3500 BCE. By 3000 BCE, the distinctive Cucuteni Tripilia package, the painted pottery, the copper tools, the concentric settlements, the ritual burning, has disappeared from the archaeological record. The Cucuteni Tripilia culture invented large-scale sedentary life in Eastern Europe, sustained it for over a millennium, and then watched it collapse. Their copper tools, their painted pottery, their architectural innovations, all passed into the archaeological record as layers of ash and fired clay. They proved that monumental urbanism wasn't unique to Mesopotamia or Egypt, and they proved that even successful adaptations have expiration dates. Fire is one exit strategy, gold is another. Wealth doesn't buy survival. Black Sea wind cuts across the Bulgarian coast. The soil here glitters, not with promise, but with death. Buried beneath these fields is the earliest worked gold in human history. Not decorative trinkets, not primitive experiments. Real wealth, real hierarchy, real power. And then it all stops. The official narrative calls the Varna necropolis simple prehistoric graves. Early Copper Age burials? Interesting, sure, but hardly earth-shattering. Except the graves aren't simple, they're spectacular. Grave 43 contains a man, 50 years old at death, buried with over 1.5 kilograms of gold. Gold rings circling his fingers and arms, gold bracelets stacked from wrist to elbow, a gold scepter clutched in his hand, a symbol of authority that predates pharaohs by centuries. Gold applications sewn onto his clothing, hundreds of tiny ornaments that would have made him shimmer when he walked, gold discs positioned around his body, gold beads strung into necklaces, more gold in a single burial than all known contemporary sites combined. This is around 4500 BCE, older than the first dynasty of Egypt, older than Sumerian city-states, older than anything we usually associate with civilization. The man in grave 43 wasn't alone in his wealth. Grave 36 contained a woman with over 200 gold objects. Grave 4 held a man with a gold penis sheath. Practical, ritual, status symbol? We'll never know, but the audacity of it speaks to a culture comfortable with ostentatious display. Grave 1 contained no human remains at all, just a clay mask wearing gold ornaments, a cenotaph perhaps, or a symbolic burial for someone whose body was elsewhere. The dark reveal is twofold. First, the sheer technical sophistication. These aren't nuggets hammered flat. This is worked gold, annealed, cold forged, polished to mirror finish. The craftspeople understood metallurgy at a level that shouldn't exist this early. They knew that gold hardens when worked cold, but can be softened by heating. They understood how to manipulate metal properties to achieve desired results. They created standardized weights. Gold objects come in consistent sizes and masses, suggesting trade or tribute systems that required consistent measurement. Someone was regulating this. Someone was controlling quality. Microscopic analysis of the gold objects reveals tool marks, fine scratches from polishing, indentations from punching decorative patterns, smooth surfaces achieved through repeated annealing and hammering. This is labor-intensive craftsmanship. A single gold bracelet might represent days of work by a skilled artisan. The man in grave 43 wore the accumulated labor of months, maybe years. Second, the sudden appearance of extreme social stratification. Grave 43 represents wealth concentrated in a single individual to a degree rarely seen in later periods. Other graves in the necropolis contain dozens of gold objects. Some contain copper axes or ceramic vessels. Many contain nothing but the yaws and skeleton. The differential is stark, brutal in its inequality. This wasn't a gradual accumulation of status over generations. It was instant hierarchy, a society that went from relatively egalitarian to radically stratified within a century or two. How? Where did this wealth come from? The gold itself came from alluvial deposits in nearby rivers, small particles washed from mountain rock, accumulated in stream beds, painstakingly collected grain by grain. The copper came from Balkan ore deposits, requiring mining, smelting, and casting knowledge. This is resource control. Someone organized the labor to extract these materials. Someone controlled their distribution. Someone decided who got gold scepters and who got dirt. And then the necropolis stops being used. Around 4300 BCE, the Varna culture, whatever it was, fades from the archaeological record. No more gold burials. No continuation of the metallurgical traditions at this scale. The copperworking continues elsewhere in the Balkans, but never again with this concentration of wealth, and never with this specific cultural package of gold-heavy elite burials combined with advanced metallurgy. What happened? Climate models suggest a period of cooler, wetter conditions that may have disrupted agriculture. The Black Sea, to the east, was undergoing dramatic changes. Some theories suggest a catastrophic flooding event, as Mediterranean waters breached natural barriers and transformed a freshwater lake into a saltwater sea, raising water levels by hundreds of meters and drowning coastal settlements. Whether this happened around 5600 BCE, the Black Sea deluge hypothesis, or more gradually remains hotly debated, but any environmental instability would have stressed coastal societies dependent on predictable resources. The flooding theory is controversial but compelling. If the Black Sea did experience sudden inundation, settlements along its shores would have been destroyed, displaced, or abandoned. The Varna culture, with its coastal connections and likely maritime trade networks, would have been devastated. Resource access would have collapsed. Trade routes would have been disrupted. The economic foundation supporting extreme wealth concentration would have eroded. There's also evidence of cultural turnover visible in burial practices. Kurgan burial traditions from the steppes begin appearing in the region. Simpler graves, different orientations, different social structures. The elaborate Varna-style burials vanish, replaced by something else entirely. This suggests population movement, cultural replacement, or absorption of Varna populations into incoming groups with different values and different ways of marking status. Recent isotopic analysis of skeletal remains from Varna shows that the gold-rich individuals had different diets than those buried without grave goods. More animal protein, particularly meat from cattle and pigs, suggesting elite access to resources and possibly specialized herding or hunting rights. Strontium isotope ratios, which reflect the geology of the region where someone spent their childhood, indicate that some of these individuals weren't locally born. They came from elsewhere. Migrants, conquerors, traders established themselves at the top of a social hierarchy. And then, within a few centuries, their lineages ended or dispersed. The artifacts themselves tell intimate stories. A tooth from one skeleton shows gold inlay. Deliberate dental modification for display. Endured pain for status. A smile that glittered. Finger bones from a metal worker's grave show calluses and stress markers consistent with repetitive fine work. Arthritis in the thumb joints. Wear patterns from gripping tools. The physical cost of creating beauty. These people lived with metal, worked metal, adorned themselves with metal, and then they stopped. Other burials contain copper axes positioned as if the deceased held them in death. Ceramic vessels, often elaborately decorated, accompanied many burials, some containing residues that suggest they held food or drink offerings. Shell beads from Mediterranean mollusks indicate trade networks spanning hundreds of kilometers. This was a connected society, wealthy enough to import exotic materials, sophisticated enough to turn them into status markers. The Varna gold now sits in museums, under glass, under LED lighting that will never tarnish it. Visitors gaze at bracelets and scepters and tiny gold bowls, marveling at the craftsmanship. Few ask the obvious question: why did the people who made these things disappear? Why did this system, this concentration of wealth, this technical sophistication, this social hierarchy, vanish so completely that the next comparable gold work in the region appears thousands of years later? Wealth concentrates. Then the lights cut. Across the ocean, architecture rises without kings, and then vanishes. Wind sweeps across platform mounds rising from the Peruvian coastal desert, Reed instruments lie abandoned where they were set down 3,000 years ago. Fish bones, salted and sun-dried, still carry the memory of ocean harvests that fed thousands. This is Caral, the oldest known urban center in the Americas, flourishing between 3000 and 1800 BCE, contemporary with the Egyptian pyramids, older than Mesoamerican civilizations by millennia. And you've probably never heard of it. The official narrative, until the 1990s, was that the Andes developed civilization late. Primitive villages gave way to more complex societies only after 1000 BCE, driven by maize agriculture imported from Mesoamerica. The Norte Chico sites, Caral, Aspero, Huaricanga, and 24 others scattered along Peru's north-central coast, demolish that narrative. The dark reveal is scale and absence. These were cities, not villages, not camps. Monumental platform mounds reaching 20 meters high. Sunken circular plazas capable of holding hundreds of people. Residential complexes, workshop areas. Irrigation systems feeding cotton and squash fields. Population estimates for Caral alone range from 3,000 during the off-season to perhaps 10,000 during major construction or festival periods. But no ceramics, no monumental artwork, no obvious depictions of warfare, no granaries filled with maize or other grain crops, they came later. The economy ran on fish, specifically anchovies and sardines harvested in massive quantities from the Pacific, traded inland for cotton, gourds, and other agricultural products. This was a maritime terrestrial exchange system, a trade network stretching from coast to highlands, operating without wheels, without pack animals, without writing, as far as we know, and without the grain agriculture that supposedly made civilization possible. Radiocarbon dating of reed bundles used in construction has established precise chronologies. Caral's main pyramid rose around 2600 BCE. The site remained occupied for approximately 1,000 years. And then, between 1800 and 1600 BCE, it was abandoned. No burn layers, no destruction, the people left. Other Norte Chico sites follow similar trajectories. Aspero, a coastal settlement with platform mounds and burial complexes, shows occupation ending around the same time. The entire cultural complex, this early experiment in urban civilization, simply stops. Why? The evidence points to environmental factors. Paleoclimate reconstructions using lake cores, ice cores, and marine sediments show increased El Niño Southern Oscillation, ENSO, variability around this time. ENSO events bring catastrophic flooding to Peru's coast, washing away fields and infrastructure, or severe droughts that collapse fish populations. The Norte Chico economy, finely tuned to predictable ocean upwelling and seasonal river flows, would have been devastated by climate instability. There's also evidence of tectonic activity. Peru sits on one of the world's most seismically active zones. Major earthquakes could have damaged or destroyed monumental architecture, undermining confidence in elite leadership or religious authority. But here's what haunts: the organized abandonment. Excavations reveal that buildings were not simply left to decay. In some cases, plazas were deliberately filled in, structures were dismantled systematically, and valuable items were removed. This wasn't panicked flight, it was planned relocation. The artifacts that remain are evocative. A musician's panpipes, crafted from condor bone, found beside a ceremonial staircase. Cotton nets for anchovy fishing, their knots still tight after millennia. A weaving needle, made from cactus spine, stuck in a wall as if the maker intended to return. Recent excavations have found evidence of knotted strings, possible precursors to the Inca quipu system, suggesting some form of record-keeping or communication. But these proto-quipus don't tell us why the city's emptied. They're just more questions frozen in fiber and time. The Norte Chico civilization proved that cities could emerge without the standard package of traits archaeologists expected. Grain agriculture, pottery, metallurgy, monumental art. They built their pyramids from stone and ambition, sustained them with fish and cotton, and then walked away when the environmental calculations no longer added up. If order without kings can dissolve overnight, so can a state with kings and archives. Picture pits filled with broken bronzes, staring gold masks with pupils the size of doorknobs, the acrid scent of charcoal and molten resin lingering in the soil 3,000 years later. This is Sanxingdui in Sichuan province, and nothing about it makes sense. The official narrative positions Sanxingdui as a regional bronze culture feeding into the later Shu kingdom, eventually absorbed into the expanding Zhou cultural sphere, a footnote in Chinese prehistory. Interesting, but not central. The dark reveal began in 1986 when workers digging a trench stumbled into two massive sacrificial pits. What they found defies every expectation of Bronze Age China. Pit 1 contained jade blades, bronze vessels, elephant tusks, and gold artifacts. Pit 2 was even stranger, a bronze sacred tree standing over 3 meters tall with stylized birds and fruits, dozens of bronze human heads with gold leaf masks, bronze statues depicting figures in elaborate ceremonial dress, and the famous bronze masks, one with protruding pupils mounted on stalks, another with an enormous nose and flared ears. These aren't Chinese bronzes, not in the style familiar from the Shang or Zhou dynasties that dominate textbooks. The faces are different, the iconography is alien, the craftsmanship is spectacular but follows different aesthetic rules. Eyes that bulge, noses that extrude, bodies elongated and stylized in ways that suggest ritual or mythological significance rather than naturalistic representation. Radiocarbon dating and stratigraphic analysis place the pit's deposition between 1200 and 1000 BCA. But the artifacts themselves, particularly the bronzes, required sophisticated workshops, organized labor, and resources that indicate a complex society operating for generations before the material was deliberately destroyed and buried. Metallurgical analysis reveals high tin bronze alloys and lead isotope signatures matching ores from local sources. The artisans weren't importing finished goods, they were producing them. Clay casting cores still adhered to some bronze pieces' preserved fingerprints, evidence of human hands shaping molds over 3 millennia ago. A ritual staff, snapped cleanly. Gold leaf fused by intense heat. These objects weren't discarded, they were sacrificed. And then the whole operation moves. Around 1000 BCE, Sanxingdui declines, and a new site, Jinsha, about 50 kilometers away, rises with similar, though not identical, material culture. Same jade working traditions, same gold craftsmanship. But the monumental bronze casting seems to end. The sacred trees, the massive masks, that tradition stops. Why destroy and bury the bronzes? Theories range from ritual renewal, breaking contact with earlier powers, to disaster response, appeasing gods after floods or earthquakes, to political upheaval, a new dynasty eliminating symbols of the old. Recent excavations have uncovered 4 more pits, bringing the total to 6, all showing similar patterns of deliberate breakage and burial. The move to Jinsha correlates with geological evidence of flooding along the Minjiang River. The entire Sanxingdui site may have become untenable due to environmental change, but the cultural continuity, the persistence of certain craft traditions, certain iconographic elements, suggests this wasn't conquest or collapse. It was relocation. What frustrates archaeologists is the silence. We have no texts from Sanxingdui, no inscriptions explaining who these people were, what they believed, why they made bronze trees and mask beings with eyes like planets. The Shu kingdom appears in later Chinese historical records, but those texts were written centuries after the fact by outsiders. The locals left no written testimony, yet the material record screams presence. These people had resources, organization, technical skill, and a coherent symbolic system that sustained itself for centuries. They cast bronze with precision. They carved jade with patience. They beat gold into sheets and applied it to wooden cores, now decayed, to create masks of impossible beauty and strangeness. One statue from Pit 2 stands out. A figure over 2 meters tall, hands positioned as if holding something, now lost, standing on a pedestal decorated with elephants. The posture suggests authority, religious, political, or both. The scale suggests importance. The hands, empty now, suggest loss. Sanxingdui forces a reckoning with Chinese prehistory. It proves that sophisticated bronze-working cultures existed outside the Yellow River heartland, developing independently or in parallel with better-known traditions. It proves that ancient Sichuan wasn't peripheral backwater, but a center of innovation and artistic achievement. And it proves that even spectacular civilizations can vanish from historical memory if they don't leave texts behind. The pits were found by accident. How many others lie still buried, waiting for a construction crew to stumble into history? And it was only beginning. Cuneiform tablets sit half-baked in the ruins of Hattusa. The gates are smoking, grain tallies cut off mid-column. The scribes never finished their work. They left, or died, before the clay could harden properly in the kiln. This is 1200 BCE, and one of the Bronze Age's great powers is collapsing in real time. The official narrative blames war. The Hittite Empire, which controlled much of Anatolia and Syria, fell to invaders. Maybe the mysterious Sea Peoples mentioned in Egyptian records, maybe rival kingdoms, maybe internal rebellion. War ended them. Simple. The dark reveal is more complex and more terrifying. The Hittites didn't fall to a single decisive blow. They bled out. The documentary evidence is chilling. Letters from Ugarit, a coastal kingdom in modern Syria, show increasingly desperate pleas for grain. The enemy ships are coming. They have set fire to my towns and committed atrocities. All my ships are in Luka territory, and all my troops are stationed in Hadi. The land is abandoned. This is the last message from the king of Ugarit before his city burns. Similar letters from Egyptian archives show the pharaoh responding to Hittite requests. We have grain, but we barely have enough for ourselves. Tree ring analysis from juniper logs in the region shows a severe drought lasting decades, the worst dry period in 900 years. Harvests failed, water sources dried up, populations couldn't be fed. Then came the fighting. Not organized army versus army campaigns, but raids, piracy, migration pressures. Groups called Sea Peoples in Egyptian records, possibly displaced populations from the Aegean or Anatolia itself, attacked coastal cities from Cyprus to Egypt. Ugarit burned around 1190 BCE. Its destruction layer contains arrowheads, collapsed walls, bodies left unburied. Hattusa, the Hittite capital, was abandoned around 1200 BCE. The monumental gates still stand. The fortification walls stretch for kilometers, but inside, the palaces are empty. The temples are cold. The massive grain storage facilities are depleted. Excavations reveal that the city wasn't sacked. There's no widespread destruction layer, no evidence of massacre. The residents walked away. But here's what archaeological surveys show. The collapse wasn't total extinction. Smaller settlements in the Anatolian highlands persisted. The Hittite language continued being written in hieroglyphic script in southern Anatolia and northern Syria for another 500 years. The people survived. The empire didn't. What failed was the system. The Hittite Empire was a Bronze Age superpower built on palace economies, centralized redistribution of grain, metal, textiles, and labor. The palace collected taxes, organized trade, employed scribes, and maintained legitimacy through military success and religious ritual. When drought made agriculture unreliable, and when external pressures disrupted trade routes, the entire apparatus stopped functioning. The tablets from Hattusa's final years are desperate inventory lists, grain shipments, troop deployments, letters to vassal states demanding loyalty. The bureaucracy kept writing until it couldn't anymore. Then the scribes left their work unfinished and abandoned the capital. Recent excavations have uncovered a tunnel system beneath Hattusa, underground grain storage designed to withstand siege. It wasn't enough. You can't store your way out of multi-decadal drought. The broken road systems tell the story. The Hittites maintained an extensive network of roads connecting the capital to provincial centers and vassal kingdoms. After 1200 BCE, these roads fell into disrepair. Without central authority to maintain them, without trade goods to justify their use, they became paths through ruins. Walk through Hattusa today, and you'll see the Lion Gate, 2 stone lions guarding an entrance to nowhere, the Sphinx Gate, the King's Gate with its relief of a warrior god, all still standing, all empty. The empire crumbled while its monuments remained. If empires can evaporate, palace economies can drown. Linear B tablets singed at the edges, the archives burning, the script itself about to die for 400 years. This is the end of Bronze Age Greece. The Mycenaeans, who would later be mythologized as Agamemnon's warriors, Odysseus's sailors, the heroes who fought at Troy, are about to disappear from history. The official narrative calls it the heroic age collapse. After centuries of palace civilization across the Greek mainland, everything crashes around the 1200–1100 BCE. The palaces burn, the writing stops. Greece enters the Dark Ages. The dark reveal is systematic dismantling. Palace after palace, Pylos, Mycenae, Tiryns, Thebes, shows destruction layers dated to the late 13th and early 12th centuries BCE. But the destruction isn't simultaneous. It's sequential, spread over decades. And it's not always external attack. Some palaces show signs of earthquake damage before the fires. Others appear to have been deliberately dismantled from within. This isn't invasion, this is unraveling. At Pylos, linear B tablets record frantic preparations. One tablet lists women and children being sent to coastal shrines, possibly for protection, possibly as religious offerings during crisis. The tablet designates them by occupation: textile workers, bath attendants, servants. These are people with names, with jobs, with lives about to be disrupted or ended. Another tablet details bronze being collected and redistributed to smiths, weapons production ramping up. Someone was expecting trouble. Someone was preparing for siege or battle. The tablets were being dried when the palace burned. Linear B was written on damp clay with a stylus, then left to air dry. If you needed permanent records, you'd fire them in a kiln. But these tablets were fresh, days old, maybe hours. The fire baked them hard, preserving them, but also ending the very civilization that created them. The bureaucracy documented its own death. Linear B script is a syllabic writing system used for accounting and administration. The tablets record grain shipments, thousands of liters of wheat and barley tracked by location and recipient. Textile production, linen workers assigned to specific workshops, daily quotas recorded. Livestock inventories, shepherds responsible for specific flocks, with individual sheep sometimes noted. Religious offerings, gold cups for Zeus, bulls for Poseidon, honey for the goddesses. They're bureaucratic documents, not literature, not history, not even personal correspondence, just ledgers, the ancient equivalent of spreadsheets. And then it all stops. After the palaces burn, Linear B disappears. Greece becomes illiterate. For 400 years, no one in the Aegean writes anything down, or at least nothing survives. When writing returns around 750 BCE, it's a different script, borrowed from Phoenicia, and a different language form, early Greek alphabetic writing, not syllabic. The Greeks of the classical period couldn't read the tablets their ancestors created. When archaeologists first discovered Linear B in the early 20th century, they couldn't decipher it until Michael Ventris cracked the code in 1952, proving it was an early form of Greek, but written in a system completely foreign to later Greek traditions. What caused the collapse? The same perfect storm that hit the Hittites. Drought, pollen cores, and lake-level studies show aridity across the eastern Mediterranean. Tree ring analysis from Anatolia confirms decades of reduced rainfall. Earthquake activity, the palaces sat in a seismically active region, and several destruction layers show evidence of earthquake damage before burning. Mycenae's walls show repair work from seismic damage. Tiryns has evidence of earthquake-induced cracks. Trade disruption, the Eastern Mediterranean network that supplied copper from Cyprus, tin from Afghanistan or Anatolia, luxury goods from Egypt and the Levant, began failing when those regions experienced their own collapses. Population movement, possibly including those same sea peoples who troubled Egypt, though the evidence for organized invasions is weaker than earlier scholars believed. But there's also evidence of internal failure. The palace economies were incredibly centralized. Everything flowed through the palace: labor, goods, religious authority. Linear B tablets from Pylos show a system of tight control, with scribes tracking individual sheep, specific textile workers, and daily rations. One tablet lists 100 workers receiving figs. Another tracks single cattle by name. This kind of micromanagement is efficient when things are stable. When environmental shock hits, it's fragile. If the palace falls, the entire system collapses because there's no redundancy, no alternative power structure. Recent excavations at Mycenae have revealed that the citadel's fortifications were expanded in the 13th century BCE. Massive cyclopean walls built from limestone blocks so large that later Greeks believed giants had constructed them. Some blocks weigh over 20 tons. Moving them required organized labor, engineering knowledge, and resources that suggest the rulers knew trouble was coming. They also built an underground cistern system, a secret passage leading to a water source inside the citadel, ensuring water access during siege. They fortified, they prepared. It wasn't enough. The Lion Gate at Mycenae, that famous entrance with two lions carved in relief flanking a column, still stands. You can walk through it today and touch stone that Mycenaean kings touched. But inside, the palace is rubble. The megaron, throne room, is a foundation outline. The frescoes that once decorated walls showing processions, hunts, and warfare are fragments in museums. Population studies using settlement surveys show dramatic depopulation after the palace's fall. Not extinction, but dispersal. People abandoned the palatial centers and moved to smaller, more defensible sites, often on hilltops or islands. Some migrated to the Anatolian coast, establishing what would become Greek colonies. The population of Greece may have dropped by 75% between 1200 and 1000 BCE. That's demographic collapse on a scale comparable to the Black Death in medieval Europe. Craft specialization collapsed with the palaces. The Bronze Age palace societies supported potters who created elaborate painted vessels, craters showing chariots and warriors, stirrup jars with octopuses and marine motifs. They employed metalworkers producing bronze weapons, gold jewelry, and inlaid daggers showing hunting scenes rendered in gold and silver. They maintained scribes who spent years learning the complex linear B system. After the collapse, pottery becomes simpler, cruder, hand-built rather than wheel-thrown, decorated with basic geometric patterns or not at all. Metal goods become rarer, often recycled from older objects rather than newly made. The division of labor that marked civilization vanishes. People return to subsistence farming, making their own tools, living in small communities without centralized authority. But here's the haunting part. Memory persisted. Centuries later, Greeks told stories about Mycenae, about Agamemnon who led the Greeks at Troy, about great walls and powerful kings who could command armies and fleets. Homer's epics, composed around 700 BCE, 4 centuries after the palaces burned, preserve garbled memories of Bronze Age palaces and warriors. The Iliad describes bronze weapons, by Homer's time, iron-dominated, boar's tusk helmets, a Mycenaean artifact type, and tower shields, another Bronze Age form. The society died, but the ghosts lingered in oral tradition, passed from generation to generation, embellished and mythologized until someone finally wrote them down. The Mycenaeans proved that civilization isn't permanent. That writing can be forgotten. That complexity can collapse back to simplicity within a few generations. They built palaces, controlled trade networks, developed sophisticated administration, and then, within a century, it all dissolved. Same century, different coasts, same signature. Ash on terraces, frescoes of dolphins fading in sea air, wine jars toppled and never righted. The palace at Knossos, maze of rooms, light wells, workshops, storage magazines, sits quiet under Cretan sun. The Minoans, named for mythical king Minos, and his labyrinth and his minotaur, dominated the Aegean Bronze Age for centuries. Their ships connected Crete to Egypt, to Anatolia, to the Greek mainland. Their art, vivid frescoes showing bull-leaping processions, marine life, suggests a culture confident and cosmopolitan. The official narrative says one volcano ended them. The Thera eruption on the island of Santorini around 1600 BCE was one of the largest volcanic explosions in recorded history. Pyroclastic flows, tsunamis, ash clouds blotting out the sun. Surely this killed Minoan civilization. The dark reveal is more complicated. The Thera eruption did devastate the Aegean. Tephra layers, volcanic ash from the eruption, have been found in cores from the eastern Mediterranean and as far as Greenland ice sheets. Tsunami deposits appear on Crete's northern coast, evidence of waves reaching the shoreline with enough force to carry marine sediments inland. But the palaces were rebuilt. Knossos, Phaistos, Malea all show destruction around the time of Thera, but also show reconstruction. The Minoans didn't end in 1600 BCE. They continued for another 200 years. What killed them was slower. A series of earthquakes around 1450 to 1400 BCE caused extensive damage across Crete. Many palaces burned, whether from earthquake-induced fires, deliberate destruction, or accidental blazes remains debated. But critically, the cultural identity shifted. Linear A script, the Minoan writing system, still undeciphered, disappears. Linear B, the Mycenaean Greek script, appears. This suggests political takeover. Mainland Greeks, Mycenaeans, conquered or occupied Crete, installed themselves in the palaces, and ran the island's economy using their own language and administrative systems. Minoan art persists in hybrid forms. The frescoes at Knossos from this later period show both Minoan motifs, bull-leaping marine scenes, and Mycenaean elements, warrior processions, different pottery styles. It's cultural blending, but under Greek dominance. By 1200 BCE, when the broader Bronze Age collapse sweeps the region, Knossos is finally abandoned. The palace burns. The Linear B tablets bake hard in the conflagration, preserving the final administrative records, and Crete enters a dark age along with the rest of the Aegean. The Thera eruption, that massive apocalyptic explosion, didn't end Minoan civilization. It damaged it, destabilized it, perhaps weakened it enough that Mycenaean takeover became possible. But the coup de grace came from earthquakes, from political conquest, from the same systemic failures that killed the Mycenaeans themselves a century later. Recent palynology, pollen analysis, and sediment cores from near Cretan palaces show agricultural intensification during the peak Minoan period, followed by landscape degradation. Deforestation for shipbuilding and construction may have caused erosion, reducing agricultural productivity. Climate proxies show increased aridity around 1450 BCE. Environmental stress, political instability, and external pressure combined. The art that survives is haunting. The Prince of the Lilies fresco from Knossos shows a young figure in profile, wearing an elaborate headdress, walking through a field of lilies. Restorations are questionable. Much of what tourists see is early 20th century reconstruction by archaeologist Arthur Evans. But the fragments that are original convey elegance, movement, life. That life ended. The Minoans didn't vanish biologically. Cretan populations show genetic continuity, but their language, their writing, their political independence, their distinctive culture, all dissolved. The Minoans became footnotes in Mycenaean records, then ghosts in Greek myths. The eruption's ice-core sulfur spike marks one of the late Bronze Age's largest atmospheric events. The civilization it destabilized took 2 centuries to die. Violence is fast, decline is slow, from sea lanes to desert roads. Rose-red rock glowing at dusk, dry cisterns carved into sandstone, the ghost of incense smoke lingering in memory, not air. Petra, the rock-cut city that controlled Arabian trade routes, hollows out in silence. The official narrative says Rome took over. In 106 CE, Emperor Trajan annexed the Nabatean kingdom, making it the province of Arabia Petraea. Roman administration absorbed Nabatean territories. End of story. The dark reveal is less triumphant. Rome didn't conquer Petra so much as inherit it, already declining. And the decline had been underway for decades. The Nabateans were master water engineers. In one of the world's most arid regions, they captured every drop of rain, channeled flash floods, and stored water in cisterns carved from living rock. The Psyche, the narrow gorge leading to Petra's famous treasury, is flanked by channels that diverted floodwaters away from the city. Terraces, dams, and underground pipes created a water infrastructure that sustained a city of perhaps 20,000 at its peak. They controlled trade. Incense from Arabia, spices from India, silk from China, all flowed through Nabatean territory. Petra sat at the crossroads, and the Nabateans charged for passage. Their wealth came not from production, but from position. But trade routes shift. By the 1st century CE, Red Sea shipping routes became more efficient. Goods that once traveled overland through Petra now moved by sea, bypassing Nabatean middlemen. The revenue dried up before the cisterns did. Epigraphy tells the decline. Nabatean inscriptions, carved in their distinctive script, a variant of Aramaic, become less frequent in the 1st century CE. After Roman annexation, the inscriptions are bilingual, Nabatean and Greek, or just Greek. The language persists in some rural areas until the 4th century, but as a written prestige language, it fades fast. Roman integration wasn't violent. The last Nabatean king, Rabel II, seems to have negotiated the transition. Petra became a Roman provincial capital, but with diminished status. New roads favored other cities. The economic center of gravity shifted north and west. Excavations show declining investment in public infrastructure after 106 CE. The monumental tombs, those famous facades carved into rose-red cliffs, were mostly finished before Roman annexation. The ones from the Roman period are smaller, less elaborate. The hydraulic systems began failing. Without centralized maintenance, the cisterns cracked, the channels silted up, the terraces eroded. A major earthquake in 363 CE damaged much of Petra's architecture. The city was rebuilt partially, but never regained its former glory. By the 5th and 6th centuries, Petra was a backwater, important only as a bishopric seat. Byzantine churches were built inside older Nabatean structures, reusing columns and facades. The rock-cut city became a shell, housing a much smaller population. Islamic conquest in the 7th century brought another power shift. Petra, already marginal, lost even its religious significance. The population dwindled further. By medieval times, Petra was abandoned except for occasional Bedouin occupation. The Western world forgot it existed until Swiss explorer Johann Ludwig Burckhardt rediscovered it in 1812. But here's the thing, the Nabateans didn't vanish. Their descendants persist in Jordan and surrounding regions. Genetic and linguistic traces remain. What vanished was the political entity, the economic system, the cultural distinctiveness. Wealth didn't save Varna. Empire didn't save Petra. Control of resources, even water in the desert, doesn't guarantee survival if the larger system reshapes itself around you. Stand in the Psyche today, and you'll hear tour guides explaining Nabatean water engineering. The channels are still there, carved in stone, empty for centuries. The treasury facade glows in afternoon light, its columns and friezes perfect, despite 2,000 years of weathering. But the city it fronted is gone. The people who carved it are gone. Only the rock remains, from sandstone wealth to frozen tombs. Permafrost tombs, wool saddles preserved by ice, skin decorated with stylized animals, the ink still visible under microscopes. This is the Altai Mountains, and the Pazyryk culture, Scythian nomads who roamed the steppes 2,500 years ago, left their dead in frozen time capsules. The official narrative dismisses nomads. They vanish, as nomads do. No permanent settlements means no legacy. Simple. The dark reveal is richness frozen in place. In 1947, Soviet archaeologist Sergei Rudenko excavated burial mounds, kurgans, in the Pazyryk Valley and found an astonishing level of preservation. The permafrost had prevented decay. Textiles survived, leather survived, human tissue survived. The bodies tell stories. A man buried with elaborate tattoos covering his arms and torso. Fantastical animals rendered in flowing Scythian animal style. A deer with exaggerated antlers, a griffin, a fish. These weren't crude prison tats. They were artwork, carefully designed, probably indicating status or spiritual significance. A woman, now called the Ice Maiden, or Princess of Ukok, was found in 1993. Her body bore tattoos on her hands and fingers, deer with exaggerated antlers, similar to the male burial. She was buried with 6 horses, wooden tables set with offerings, and Chinese silk. Evidence of Silk Road trade networks active centuries before the term Silk Road existed. The material culture is spectacular. Felt carpets with elaborate dyed patterns, wooden saddles with leather applications, horse masks decorated with gold leaf and felt antlers, transforming horses into supernatural creatures. clothing made from wool, leather, and fur, tailored precisely. These people were mobile, but not primitive. They commanded resources, maintained trade networks, and developed sophisticated artistic traditions. And then, they fade. The distinctive Pazaric culture appears in the archaeological record around 500 BCE and declines by 200 BCE. What happened? Climate change, for one. Dendroclimate reconstructions from tree rings show increased aridity and cooling in the Altai region during the late 1st millennium BCI. Grasslands deteriorated, pasture quality declined. Nomadic herding becomes less viable when the grass stops growing. Political realignment, for another. The rise of the Xiongnu Confederation to the east and the expansion of Sarmatian groups to the west squeezed Pazaric territory. Steppe politics are fluid. Alliances shift, groups merge, weaker tribes are absorbed or dispersed. The Pazaric may have been integrated into larger nomadic confederations, losing their distinct identity in the process. The Kurgans themselves show the shift. Earlier Pazaric burials are rich, with multiple horse sacrifices and elaborate goods. Later burials are simpler, fewer horses, less gold. The wealth and power concentrated in elite families seems to have dissipated. Horse gear distributions change too. The distinctive Pazaric saddle designs, with specific stirrup shapes and decorative techniques, appear in later Xiongnu contexts, suggesting cultural transmission or assimilation. The people didn't vanish, their identity did. Recent genetic analysis of Pazaric remains shows mixed ancestry, contributions from both Eastern and Western Eurasian populations, consistent with steppe communities that traded and intermarried across vast distances. The Ice Maiden carried haplogroups linking her to Central Asian populations. These people were nodes in far-reaching networks. But networks collapse. When trade routes shift, or when climate makes pastoralism unsustainable, or when stronger groups dominate, the nodes dissolve. The Pazaric culture, with its tattooed horsemen and golden artifacts and frozen tombs, became a chapter in someone else's story. Walk through the State Hermitage Museum in St. Petersburg, and you'll see Pazaric artifacts under glass. The felt carpets still show their colors. The horse masks still gleam with gold. The tattoos, photographed during excavation, show artistic sophistication that rivals any civilized culture. But the people who made these things, who rode horses across mountain passes, who traded with Chinese silk merchants and Persian craftsmen, who buried their dead with care and wealth, are names lost to time. We call them Pazaric, after a valley where their tombs were found. Their own name for themselves is unknown, from frozen tombs to the world's first temple hill. Pillars with foxes and vultures carved in relief. T-shaped monoliths weighing 10-20 tons each, arranged in circles. Deliberately backfilled enclosures, buried under tons of rubble and soil. This is Göbekli Tepe in southeastern Turkey, and it rewrites everything we thought we knew about the origins of civilization. The official narrative, before Göbekli Tepe, was clean. Agriculture came first, creating food surpluses that allowed permanent settlements, which eventually developed into cities and civilizations. Religion and monumental architecture were products of agricultural societies. Pre-farmers didn't build temples. They lacked the time, resources, and social organization. Göbekli Tepe says otherwise. The dark reveal is sequence. Radiocarbon dating of organic material from the site places the earliest structures around 9600 BCE, 11,600 years ago. This is pre-pottery Neolithic A, before domesticated grains, before settled villages, before pottery, before metalworking. The people who built Göbekli Tepe were hunter-gatherers, and they built something monumental. The site consists of multiple enclosures, each featuring massive T-shaped pillars arranged in circles or ovals. The pillars are carved from limestone bedrock, quarried from nearby slopes using stone tools. Some pillars are decorated with relief carvings, animals mostly, foxes, boars, aurochs, vultures, snakes, scorpions, occasionally human-like figures. The iconography suggests symbolic or religious significance, not merely decorative impulses. The enclosures were deliberately buried. This isn't erosion or collapse. Excavations show that each enclosure was used for a period, perhaps decades, perhaps generations, and then carefully filled in with rubble, soil, and stone tools, possibly ritual deposits. New enclosures were then built nearby, creating a layered sequence of construction, use, and burial. Why bury a temple? Theories proliferate. Ritual renewal, ending one phase and beginning another. Conflict resolution. Different groups building and then ritually closing their structures. Environmental necessity. If the site became contested or if resources depleted, burying the enclosures might have been a way to sanctify abandonment. But here's the staggering part. The earliest enclosures are the most sophisticated. The carving quality, the pillar size, the architectural ambition, all decline over time. Later phases at Göbekli Tepe feature smaller pillars, cruder carving, less impressive construction. This is the opposite of expected development. Civilizations are supposed to improve, to innovate, to build bigger and better. Göbekli Tepe went backward. The site was abandoned entirely around 8000 BCE. The last enclosures were buried, and the hill became just another rise in the landscape. Sediment and wind-blown soil covered the ruins. For 10,000 years, Göbekli Tepe was invisible. Faunal assemblages, animal bones, from the site show gazelle as the primary meat source, supplemented by wild cattle, wild boar, and birds. These were hunted animals, not domesticated herds. The people who built Göbekli Tepe were still foraging, but they were also gathering in large numbers, hundreds, possibly thousands, for construction projects and ritual events. Micromorphology studies of the fill layers show that the burial wasn't gradual. Tons of material were deposited quickly, suggesting organized collective effort. The builders didn't abandon the site and let it decay. They ended it intentionally. Excavations are ongoing. The site is huge. Approximately 20 enclosures have been detected via ground-penetrating radar, but only a fraction have been excavated. Each new trench reveals more pillars, more carvings, more questions. The broader implication is revolutionary. Monumental architecture predates agriculture. Social organization complex enough to quarry, move, and erect multi-ton pillars predates settled life. This flips the script. Maybe agriculture developed to support ritual sites, not the other way around. Maybe people gathered for ceremonies first, and permanent settlement followed. But then they buried it. They erased their own monumentality. Who else did? Göbekli Tepe isn't unique anymore. Similar sites, Karahan Tepe, Hamzan Tepe, Sefer Tepe, have been identified in the region. This was a cultural phenomenon, a shared symbolic system, a network of pre-pottery Neolithic hunter-gatherers building stone temples and then burying them. And then it all stopped. By 8000 BCE, the tradition ended. Agriculture spread across the Fertile Crescent. Settled villages appeared. Pottery was invented. The world moved on. But for some 1,500 years, people without agriculture, without metal, without writing, organized themselves to carve foxes and vultures into stone pillars, to raise monuments that would outlast them, and then to bury those monuments in silence, from buried pillars to the world's longest memory. Cord-marked pots by cedar forests, shell middens full of ritual, figurines with exaggerated features, bulging eyes, abstract bodies, arranged in ways that suggest worship or commemoration. This is Jomon, Japan, and it lasted for 14,000 years. Read that again. 14,000 years. That's longer than the entire span from the invention of agriculture to the present day. That's longer than recorded history by an order of magnitude. The official narrative calls Jomon culture Neolithic Japan, a prehistoric prelude to the real history that begins with rice agriculture and state formation. Interesting perhaps, but not central. The dark reveal is duration and richness. The Jomon period stretches from approximately 14,000 BCE to 300 BCE, spanning the Pleistocene-Holocene transition, the end of the Ice Age, climate stabilization, and millennia of cultural development. And it ended suddenly. The pottery is the signature. Jomon means cord-marked, referring to the decorative technique of pressing twisted plant fibers into wet clay before firing. The earliest Jomon pottery, from around 14,000 BCE, is among the oldest pottery in the world, predating ceramics from the Near East and China. But the pottery evolved. Over 14 millennia, Jomon potters experimented with forms, decorations, and firing techniques. Early Jomon pottery is relatively simple, conical cooking vessels with functional shapes. Middle Jomon pottery becomes wildly elaborate, flame-rimmed pots with extravagant decorations, some vessels so ornate they seem barely functional. Late Jomon pottery simplifies again, becoming more restrained and standardized. The society was complex without being civilized in the traditional sense. No cities, no writing, no centralized states, but also permanent and semi-permanent settlements, some housing hundreds of people, sophisticated fishing and foraging strategies including deep-sea fishing for tuna, trade networks moving jade, obsidian, and lacquerware across the Japanese archipelago, ritual sites with stone circles and elaborate burials, shell middens, deposits of discarded shells, bones, and artifacts, reveal detailed information about diet and ritual. The inhabitants consumed mollusks, fish, deer, wild boar, and nuts, especially chestnuts and acorns. Plant management techniques suggest proto-horticulture, encouraging useful species without full domestication. The figurines, dog, are haunting. Abstract humanoid forms, often female, with exaggerated hips and breasts, elaborate hairstyles or headdresses, and slit eyes. Some are broken deliberately, possibly in rituals. Others are complete, carefully placed in burials or settlement contexts. They speak to symbolic thinking, to religious or spiritual practices that left no written record. And then rice arrived. Around 900 BCE, wet rice agriculture, along with metallurgy, bronze and iron, reached Japan from the Korean peninsula. The Yayoi period began. Within a few centuries, the Jomon lifeways yielded to agricultural societies with a hierarchical organization, permanent rice fields, metalworking, and social stratification. Genetic and isotopic studies show population change. The Yayoi people were immigrants or descendants of immigrants from mainland Asia, bringing different genes, different technologies, different social structures. The Jomon people didn't vanish biologically. Modern Japanese carry Jomon ancestry, but they were absorbed, outnumbered, and culturally overwhelmed. Pottery seriation shows the transition. Late Jomon ceramics coexist with early Yayoi pottery in some sites, suggesting overlap or interaction. But the Jomon styles disappear. The Yayoi preference for simpler, more functional vessels, often fired at higher temperatures, replaces the elaborate Jomon traditions. Why did Jomon culture persist for so long, and why did it end so suddenly? The answer is environmental and technological. For 14,000 years, Japan's environment supported foraging lifeways. Abundant seafood, rich forests, predictable seasons, all made permanent settlement possible without agriculture. The Jomon people had no reason to farm. They were already living well. But rice agriculture, when it arrived, offered something different: surplus production, which enabled population growth and social complexity that foraging couldn't match. Yayoi communities expanded rapidly, supported by rice fields that could feed more people per hectare than foraging territories. The Jomon lifeways, however sophisticated, couldn't compete demographically. Recent excavations at sites like Sanemaruyama show large late Jomon settlements, with evidence of long-distance trade and social organization. This wasn't primitive society, but it was non-agricultural, and when agriculture arrived, it was displaced. The Jomon people left no texts, but they left pottery, figurines, stone circles, and shell middens that testify to 14,000 years of cultural continuity. That's a deeper memory than Egypt, than Mesopotamia, than any cradle of civilization. And it ended not with collapse or catastrophe, but with assimilation into a new economic system. Jomon continuity exceeds the lifespan of many empires by an order of magnitude, and it melted away in centuries when agriculture arrived, from deep time to mother culture. Basalt kings and jungle mist, heads taller than a man, weighing up to 40 tons, carved with individual features, distinct faces, each unique. This is La Venta, San Lorenzo, Tres Zapotes. This is Mesoamerica's mother culture. The official narrative calls the Olmecs precursors. They developed the first Mesoamerican civilization, urban centers, monumental architecture, calendrical systems, possibly early writing, between 1600 and 400 BCE. Then they dissolved into successor cultures, Maya, Zapotec, Totonac. Their legacy continued, just under different names. The dark reveal is environmental stress and political collapse. Around 400 BCE, the major Olmec centers depopulate. The colossal heads are buried or abandoned. The ball courts fall silent. The platform mounds erode. La Venta, the major late Olmec center, sits on an island in a swampy river delta. Not ideal terrain for a city, but the Olmecs mastered hydraulic engineering, raised platforms, drainage systems, artificial mounds. The Great Pyramid at La Venta is a conical earthen mound 34 meters high, built from millions of basket loads of clay. Surrounding it, plazas, elite residences, workshops, and those famous basalt sculptures. The colossal heads are portraits, rulers almost certainly. 17 have been found across Olmec sites, each carved from single basalt boulders quarried in the Tuxtla Mountains, 100 kilometers away. Moving 40-ton stones through jungle and swamp required organized labor, specialized knowledge, and significant resources. These weren't trinkets, they were statements of power. But around 400 BCE, La Venta is abandoned. The sculptures are buried in ritual contexts, deliberately placed, covered with layers of colored clay and stone. The population disperses. The site becomes archaeological memory. Why? Environmental change is part of it. River course changes in the region around 400 BCE disrupted water management systems. The Tonala and Coatzacoalcos river systems shifted, potentially flooding settlements or cutting off water access. Pollen cores from the region show deforestation and agricultural intensification during Olmec occupation, followed by landscape recovery, suggesting population decline. Political realignment is another factor. The Olmec heartland on the Gulf Coast was never the only center of Mesoamerican complexity. Highland cultures in Oaxaca, early Zapotec, and central Mexico were developing their own trajectories. As these regions gained power, the Gulf Coast Olmecs lost economic and political centrality. Iconography diffusion tells the story. Olmec motifs, the word jaguar, the feathered serpent, certain calendrical symbols appear across Mesoamerica during the Olmec period, suggesting trade, pilgrimage, or cultural influence. But after 400 BCE, these motifs become regionalized, adapted into local styles. The Olmec brand loses its monopoly. Yet the Olmecs didn't vanish biologically or culturally. DNA studies of modern populations in the region show continuity. The languages spoken in the area, Mixozoquean languages, are likely descendants of the language the Olmecs spoke. The people remained. The political and cultural system collapsed. Recent excavations at San Lorenzo show a similar trajectory. Abandonment around 900 BCE, earlier than La Venta, followed by reoccupation by different groups. The monumental stone monuments were defaced or buried. New residents built over older structures, using Olmec platforms as foundations, but not continuing Olmec artistic or architectural traditions. The Olmec legacy is real. The Mesoamerican ball game, that ritual sport played with rubber balls on eye-shaped courts, appears first in Olmec contexts. The long count calendar, used later by the Maya, has Olmec precursors. Iconographic elements like the feathered serpent and maize god appear in Olmec art centuries before Maya or Aztec elaborations. But the Olmec polities themselves ended. The colossal heads, now in museums or standing isolated in archaeological parks, are divorced from the societies that created them. We see the craftsmanship, the individuality of the faces, the labor invested in moving those stones. We don't hear the language, don't know the names of the rulers depicted, don't understand the full symbolic system that made those sculptures meaningful. Architecture without memory, like Norte-Chico, mound silhouettes against Midwest storms, wood henges ticking seasons, massive circles of cedar posts aligned to solstices, functioning as calendars and ritual markers. This is Cahokia, across the Mississippi River from modern St. Louis, and it was the largest pre-Columbian city north of Mexico. Most Americans have never heard of it. The official narrative, when it exists, calls Cahokia a chiefdom, a complex society, sure, but not a city, not a civilization. just a large Native American settlement that faded. Move along. The dark reveal is scale. At its peak around 1100 CE, Cahokia housed an estimated 10,000 to 20,000 people, possibly more. Monk's Mound, the central platform mound, rises 30 meters high with a base covering 5 hectares, comparable in volume to Egypt's smaller pyramids. Over 100 additional mounds surrounded it. Platform mounds for elite residences, conical burial mounds, ridgetop mounds of unknown function. This wasn't a village. It was an urban center with craft specialization, trade networks stretching from the Great Lakes to the Gulf Coast, social hierarchy, and monumental architecture that required coordinated labor on a massive scale. And by 1350 CE, it was abandoned. The rise is dramatic. Around 1050 CE, Cahokia explodes in population and construction. Within a few generations, Monk's Mound is built, the Grand Plaza is laid out, residential districts expand, and satellite communities appear across the American bottom, the Mississippi River floodplain. This is the Mississippian emergence, a cultural package including maize agriculture, shell-tempered pottery, and mound building that spreads across the eastern woodlands. But Cahokia is the epicenter, the largest, the most complex. Excavations reveal specialized craft production, workshops for shell beads, copperworking, stone tool production. Exotic materials appear: marine shells from the Gulf, copper from the Great Lakes, mica from the Appalachians, indicating trade networks or tribute systems. The wood hinges are astronomical. 5 circles of posts, built sequentially, not simultaneously, aligned to solar events, equinoxes, solstices. Archaeoastronomy studies show precise alignments, suggesting calendrical knowledge and ritual tied to agricultural cycles. Someone was watching the sky, calculating the seasons, orchestrating ceremonies around celestial events. But the system unraveled. Alluvial records, sediment analysis from the floodplain, show changing flood regimes. The Mississippi River in the 12th and 13th centuries experienced increased flooding frequency and severity. Cahokia, built on a floodplain, would have been vulnerable. Fields flooded, structures damaged. The very landscape that made agriculture productive became unstable. Isotopic analysis of human remains shows dietary changes. Early Cahokia populations relied heavily on maize. Later populations show more diverse diets, including increased consumption of wetland resources, suggesting agricultural, stress or dietary shifts in response to environmental change. There's also evidence of social stress. Palisade walls were constructed around the central precinct, wooden fortifications enclosing Monk's Mound and elite residences. Why wall off the center if not for defense or social control? Some interpretations suggest internal conflict, factional fighting, or attempts by elites to maintain authority as the system destabilized. By 1200 CE, Cahokia's population begins declining. By 1300 CE, much of the city is abandoned. By 1350 CE, the site is largely empty. The mounds remain, but the people are gone. Where did they go? Archaeological surveys show population dispersal across the region. Some groups moved north into Wisconsin, others moved south into Arkansas or Missouri. The Mississippian cultural package persisted. Other mound-building societies continued elsewhere in the southeast. But Cahokia itself, the great center, was abandoned. Recent excavations in residential areas show house lot churn, rapid cycles of construction, occupation, and abandonment. People were moving in and out of Cahokia even during its height, suggesting demographic volatility. This wasn't a stable, long-term urban population. It was a magnet that attracted people, used them up, and then lost its pull. Faunal analysis, animal bones, shows resource depletion. Early Cahokia residents hunted deer, waterfowl, and fish in abundance. Later occupants showed declining access to large game, increasing reliance on smaller animals and mollusks. The landscape was being overhunted, overfished, overused. Monk's Mound today is a grassy hill managed by Illinois State Parks. Tourists climb to the top and look out over suburban sprawl. A few smaller mounds survive, protected within the Cahokia Mound State Historic Site. But most were destroyed, plowed under for agriculture, leveled for development. The largest pre-Columbian city north of Mexico is now a UNESCO World Heritage Site, surrounded by highways and strip malls. The Mississippian culture continued elsewhere: Moundville in Alabama, Etowah in Georgia, Spiro in Oklahoma, but none matched Cahokia's size or complexity. And even these secondary centers eventually declined, eroded, were abandoned. Monk's Mound's volume rivals Egypt's smaller pyramids. The civilization that built it lasted 3 centuries. The mound will stand for millennia. Water managed, and then it didn't. Canals and dams laced through rice wetlands. Jade axes arranged in burials, polished to mirror finish. Earthen walls higher than city ramparts enclosing a ceremonial center. This is Liangzhu, in the Yangtze River Delta, and it was the most sophisticated Neolithic culture in East Asia, 5,300 years ago. And then the water came. The official narrative, until recently, barely mentioned Liangzhu, a Neolithic culture, some jade artifacts in museums. Not much else. Chinese historiography focused on the Yellow River civilizations, the traditional cradle of Chinese civilization. The Yangtze Delta was peripheral. The dark reveal came from geoarchaeology. Starting in the 1980s, intensive surveys and excavations revealed a massive hydraulic infrastructure, dams, reservoirs, canals, designed to control water flow through the low-lying delta. The Liangzhu people were water engineers on a staggering scale. The centerpiece is a water management system near the capital city, modern Hangzhou region. Archaeologists identified 11 dams forming a network that controlled water from surrounding hills, channeling it into reservoirs and irrigation canals. The dams were built from clay and stone, with grass and bamboo reinforcement, reaching heights of 10-15 meters and stretching hundreds of meters in length. Geoarchaeology of these structures shows construction techniques and dating. Radiocarbon on organic materials within the dam structure places construction around 5,000 years ago. This is contemporary with early Mesopotamian city-states, with pre-dynastic Egypt, with the end of the Neolithic in Europe, and the Liangzhu were managing water on an industrial scale. The city itself covered over 300 hectares, protected by massive earthen walls. Excavations within the walled area reveal high-status residences, craft workshops, and ritual platforms. Outside the walls, residential areas, agricultural fields, and burial complexes. The burials are what initially drew attention. Liangzhu elite graves contain jade, elaborate jade objects including kong, tubes, bai, discs, yueyue, axes, and figurines. Some graves hold hundreds of jade artifacts, representing thousands of hours of labor. The jade was imported from sources over 100 kilometers away and worked using stone and bamboo tools, an incredibly labor-intensive process. But around 4,300 years ago, catastrophic flooding hit. Sediment cores from the region show thick layers of flood silt overlying Liangzhu settlements. These aren't seasonal floods. This is major inundation, possibly from dam failure, possibly from extreme monsoon events, possibly from both. The flood layers bury Liangzhu sites abruptly. Excavations at the city center show occupation ending suddenly, with structures and artifacts buried under meters of sandy silt. No gradual decline, no controlled abandonment. The water came, and the city drowned. Recent paleoclimate reconstructions using stalagmite records from nearby caves show a period of extreme monsoon variability around 4,300 years ago, the 4.2 kiloyear event again, a global climate anomaly that destabilized societies from the Mediterranean to East Asia. Intense monsoon rains would have overwhelmed even sophisticated water management systems. Levee breaches, where water breaks through embankments, leave distinctive sedimentary signatures. Analysis of flood deposits near Liangzhu shows high energy flow patterns, indicating sudden, catastrophic breaching rather than gradual overtopping. The dams failed, the reservoirs emptied, the fields flooded. The city was submerged. The Liangzhu culture doesn't end completely. Related archaeological cultures, Qianshanyang, Guangfulin, persist in the region for a few more centuries, but without the centralized power, the hydraulic engineering, the jade ritual system. The distinctive Liangzhu package dissolves. Recent excavations have found jade workshops within the city, revealing production techniques. Jade was abraded using quartz sand and bamboo saws, then polished with fine abrasives. The workshops contained unfinished pieces, broken tools, and jade debris, evidence of intensive production. But after the flooding, jade ritual goods become rare in the region. The symbolic system, tied to elite authority and water control, collapsed when the water won. In 2019, UNESCO designated the archaeological ruins of Liangzhu City as a World Heritage Site, recognizing it as an outstanding example of early urban civilization, expressed in earthen monuments, urban planning, water management systems, and hierarchical burial system. International recognition came 5,000 years late. Stand at the archaeological site today and you'll see reconstructed dam foundations, museum displays of jade artifacts, and interpretive signs explaining the hydraulic engineering. But the scale is hard to grasp. These were people who understood hydrology, who organized labor to move millions of cubic meters of earth, who created a functioning urban civilization based on water control, and the water destroyed it. Drought can starve an empire. Flood can erase it. The pattern isn't local, it's planetary. Stone circles in the Sahara, alignments pointing to summer solstice sunrise. Cattle tumuli, ceremonial burials for cattle, not humans, marking the landscape. This is Nabta Playa in southern Egypt, 6,000, 10,000 years ago, when the Sahara was green. Wait, green Sahara? The official narrative treats the Sahara as eternal desert. Sure, it fluctuated a bit, but essentially it's always been sand. The Nile Valley was the cradle of Egyptian civilization. The desert was always marginal. The dark reveal is the African humid period. Between approximately 15,000 and 5,000 years ago, increased monsoon activity turned much of the Sahara into savanna. Lakes appeared, rivers flowed, animals migrated north. Elephants, giraffes, hippos, and people followed. Nabta Playa was a seasonal lake surrounded by grasslands. Pastoralist groups gathered there during summer months when the lake filled with rain. They grazed cattle, hunted, and, critically, built monuments. The stone circles are megaliths, not as large as Stonehenge, but impressive nonetheless. Upright stones arranged in circles and alignments, dated to around 6,000, 7,000 years ago. Archaeoastronomy studies suggest alignments to celestial events, particularly the summer solstice. These weren't accidental arrangements. Someone was measuring, planning, commemorating. The cattle tumuli are even stranger. Burials containing cattle skeletons, placed in stone-lined chambers and covered with mounded earth. Cattle were wealth, status, spiritual significance. Burying them ritually suggests organized religion and social complexity among mobile pastoralists. But around 5,000 years ago, the rains failed. The African humid period ended as monsoon patterns shifted southward. The Sahara began its transformation back into hyper-arid desert. Lakes dried up, grasslands withered. Animals and people retreated to the Nile Valley and sub-Saharan Africa. Lakebed desiccation is visible in sediment cores. The shift from organic-rich muds, indicating lake environments, to wind-blown sand happens abruptly in the geological record. Within centuries, the landscape transforms. Pollen cores showed the disappearance of grassland and woodland taxa, replaced by desert scrub and eventually bare sand. Nabta Playa was abandoned. The stone circles remained, but the people left. Where did they go? Some researchers suggest these early Saharan pastoralists migrated to the Nile Valley, contributing to the rise of pre-dynastic Egyptian culture. Cattle cults, astronomical knowledge, megalithic traditions, all appear in early Egyptian contexts. But the direct connection is debated. What's certain is that Nabta Playa represents early African complexity, organized enough to create monuments, sophisticated enough to track celestial events, invested enough in cattle to bury them ceremonially, and then the desert swallowed it. For millennia, Nabta Playa was unknown, just more Saharan emptiness. Rediscovery came in the 1970s when archaeologists began surveying the region. Now it's protected, studied, and slowly being buried again by shifting sands. Desert gives, then takes. Underground tunnels stretching hundreds of kilometers. Oases blooming in absolute desert. A civilization thriving where nothing should survive. This is the Garamantian kingdom in the Fezzan region of modern Libya, and they conquered the Sahara with hydrology. The official narrative barely knows them. Roman sources mention the Garamantes as desert raiders and traders, exotic barbarians on the empire's southern frontier, minor players. Footnote material. The dark reveal came from aerial photography and remote sensing. Starting in the 1960s, researchers noticed strange patterns in the Sahara: irrigated field systems, settlement mounds, and most remarkably, remnants of Foggara, underground aqueducts that tapped fossil water from deep aquifers. The Foggara system is genius. In terrain where surface water is nearly impossible to maintain, evaporation is brutal, you dig tunnels, sometimes 10 kilometers or more, from the water table to the surface, allowing water to flow by gravity through underground channels to oasis settlements. The system minimizes evaporation while maximizing water delivery. The Garamantes built hundreds of these tunnels, creating an agricultural infrastructure that supported urban centers in the middle of the Sahara. At its peak, around 1 to 500 CE, the Garamantian kingdom controlled trans-Saharan trade routes, served as middlemen between sub-Saharan Africa and the Roman Empire, and maintained a sophisticated urban culture. Roman sources describe campaigns against the Garamantes, raids and counter-raids, attempts to control trade routes. The Garamantes had chariots, horses, and military organization. They weren't passive victims. They were regional powers. But groundwater isn't infinite. Geohydrology studies show that the Saharan aquifers the Garamantes tapped were fossil water, accumulated during the African humid period, but not being recharged in the current arid climate. Every liter drawn was one step closer to depletion. Well depths provide the smoking gun. Early Garamantian wells are relatively shallow. Later wells are deeper, much deeper, as the water table dropped. Eventually, the Foggara system couldn't reach water anymore. The tunnels dried up. Settlement shrinkage is visible in archaeological surveys. Sites that once covered hectares contract to small villages or are abandoned entirely. The field systems, visible in satellite imagery as rectilinear patterns of ancient irrigation channels, fall out of use. The Sahara reclaims the land. By the 7th century CE, when Arab Islamic expansion reached the Fezzan, the Garamantian kingdom was already a shadow of its former self. The conquerors found diminished populations clinging to remaining water sources. The once powerful kingdom couldn't resist incorporation into the emerging Islamic world. Modern remote sensing and excavation reveal the scale of what was lost. The ancient field systems covered thousands of square kilometers. The Foggara tunnels, hand-dug through. Bedrock and sand represent millions of person-hours of labor. The Garamantes bet everything on water engineering, and for a millennium, it worked. But fossil water runs out. Empires built on non-renewable resources are living on borrowed time. Hydraulics create empires. Hydraulics unmake them. Carved tombs in cliff faces, facades imitating wooden architecture rendered in stone, pillar tombs rising from rocky hillsides, inscriptions in a unique script, related to, but distinct from Greek. This is ancient Lycia, on the southwestern coast of Anatolia, and it possessed fierce independence until it didn't. The official narrative says conquest happened, first Persia, then Alexander, then successor kingdoms, then Rome. Just another region absorbed into larger empires, standard ancient history. The dark reveal is linguistic and cultural erasure. The Lycian language, part of the Anatolian family, related to Hittite and Luwian, appears in inscriptions from the 5th to 4th centuries BCE. Lycian script is an alphabet derived from Greek but adapted for their language. The inscriptions commemorate elites, record dedications, mark ownership, and then the language stops being written. By the Roman period, inscriptions are in Greek or Latin. Lycian survives, maybe, as a spoken vernacular for a while, but as a written prestige language, it vanishes within a few generations. Conquest isn't always violent. The Persians incorporated Lycia into their empire around 540 BCE, but local governance persisted. Satraps, Persian governors, worked with local elites. Bilingual inscriptions from this period show both Lycian and Greek, indicating cultural contact and administrative necessity. Alexander's conquest in 334 BCE brought Hellenization, Greek became the language of administration, trade, and culture. Lycian elites increasingly adopted Greek names, Greek customs, Greek identity. The old language became unfashionable. By the time Rome took over in the 1st century BCE, Lycia was already culturally Greek. Roman rule accelerated the process. The cities thrived under the empire, Xanthos, Patara, Myra, Telos, but thrived as Greek-Roman cities, not Lycian ones. Funerary architecture shows the transition. Early Lycian tombs, 5th-4th centuries BCE, are distinctively local, pillar tombs, rock-cut facades with wooden architectural elements carved in stone. Later, tombs adopt Greek or Roman styles, temple facades, sarcophagi with Greek mythological relief. Coinage shifts too. Early Lycian cities minted coins with local symbols and Lycian inscriptions. Hellenistic-era coins are Greek in design and language. Roman period coins are thoroughly imperial. The genetic and physical population didn't disappear. The people remained, but the cultural identity dissolved. Within a few centuries, being Lycian meant living in a geographic region, not belonging to a distinct ethnic or linguistic group. Lycian identity persisted longest in the countryside, where linguistic conservatism is typical. But even rural populations eventually shifted to Greek. By late antiquity, when Christian bishops wrote letters and administrative documents, they wrote in Greek. Lycian was dead. Modern linguistics has reconstructed some Lycian from inscriptions, using comparative methods with other Anatolian languages. But the reconstructions are partial, provisional, and will never recover the living language as it was spoken. Some vanish in silence, others under conquest paperwork. Defufa, massive mud brick structures rising from the Nubian desert, burials with thousands of cattle sacrificed, surrounding elite graves, a kingdom that rivaled Egypt for power and then was systematically erased. The official narrative positions Kerma as a minor Nubian culture, Egypt's southern neighbor, sometimes trading partner, often enemy, eventually conquered. Background noise in Egypt's grand narrative. The dark reveal is rivalry and obliteration. From approximately 2500–1500 BCE, the kingdom of Kerma controlled the Upper Nile, ruling from its capital, also called Kerma, in what is now northern Sudan. At its height, Kerma was a major power, wealthy from trade, organized with centralized authority, capable of challenging Egyptian hegemony. The Defufa complexes are monumental. The western Defufa, a religious or administrative building, rises over 18 meters high, one of the largest mud brick structures in ancient Africa. Construction required organizational capacity and labor mobilization that indicates state-level complexity. Elite burials near Kerma are spectacular and disturbing. Large tumuli, burial mounds, contain the principal deceased surrounded by hundreds of sacrificed individuals, retainers, servants, possibly prisoners. Cattle by the thousands were slaughtered and buried as well. These mass sacrifices indicate extreme social stratification and centralized power over life and death. Egyptian records from the Middle Kingdom, 2000–1700 BCE, mention Kerma as a Kush, an enemy to be fought, a territory to be raided. During the Second Intermediate Period, when Egypt was divided and weak, Kerma expanded northward, even forming alliances with the Hyksos, foreign rulers in Lower Egypt, against Theban dynasties. But when Egypt reunified under the New Kingdom, 1500 BCE onward, retribution came. Pharaohs Thutmose I, Thutmose III, and others campaigned aggressively into Nubia, conquering Kerma and incorporating its territories into Egyptian colonial administration. The conquest was cultural as well as military. Kerma's religious sites were desecrated or Egyptianized. Egyptian temples were built over Nubian sacred spaces. Local elites were either eliminated or co-opted into Egyptian administration. The Nubian language and material culture persisted in modified forms, but Kerma as a political entity was erased. Burial practices changed. The mass sacrificial burials ended, whether banned by Egyptian authorities or abandoned due to loss of elite power. Egyptian-style mummification and burial goods replaced local traditions. By the time of the New Kingdom's height, Nubia was thoroughly colonized. But here's the irony. Nubian culture resurged. By the 8th century BCE, a new Nubian kingdom based at Napata and later Meroe not only regained independence but conquered Egypt itself, the 25th dynasty. The Nubian pharaohs ruled Egypt for a century, presenting themselves as restorers of Egyptian tradition. But Kerma itself, the original kingdom, never returned. Its cultural forms, its language, probably an early form of the Meroitic language, its political structures, all were overwritten. The archaeological site was rediscovered in the early 20th century by European archaeologists who initially misidentified it as an Egyptian outpost, not an independent African kingdom. Modern excavations have restored Kerma's reputation. The Defifa complexes have been partially reconstructed. Museums in Khartoum display Kerma pottery, jewelry, and burial goods. But the kingdom's own voice, any written records they might have kept, is lost. We know Kerma through Egyptian eyes and through archaeology. We don't hear Kerma speak. Empire as solvent, as with Lycia and Nabatea. Fortified oases in Central Asian deserts, seals depicting mythological creatures, snakes, eagles, composite beings, workshops producing turquoise beads, bronze tools, and ceramic vessels with geometric patterns. This is the Bactria Margiana Archaeological Complex, BMAG, and it sat at the crossroads of Bronze Age trade routes linking Iran, India, and the steppes. The official narrative called them Indo-Iranians or Proto-Indo-Europeans, a way station in migration narratives, not a civilization in their own right. The dark reveal is sophistication and vanishing. From approximately 2300 to 1700 BCE, the Biazak flourished in what is now Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Afghanistan, and eastern Iran. They built fortified settlements, often circular or oval in plan, engaged in long-distance trade, practiced metallurgy and advanced ceramics, and developed religious iconography that influenced later Iranian and Indian traditions. The fortified compounds are distinctive. Thick mud brick walls, sometimes double-walled, enclosing residential and craft areas. Excavations at sites like Gonur Tepe reveal multi-room buildings, workshops, and storage facilities. This isn't nomadic pastoralism. This is settled urban life in marginal environments. Seals and ceilings, clay impressions from seals, show administrative systems. The imagery, composite creatures, snakes with multiple heads, eagles, suggest shared symbolic systems across the Biamak region. Trade goods include lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, turquoise from Iran, tin and copper for bronze production. But around 1700 BCE, the system begins failing. The fortified oases contract or are abandoned. Ceramic styles change. New cultural elements appear. Steppe-derived pottery types, different burial practices, changing animal bone assemblages. More horse remains, suggesting increased pastoralism. Ancient DNA analysis reveals population turnover. Early BMAC populations show genetic affinities with Iranian farmers and earlier Near Eastern populations. Later populations show increasing steppe ancestry, genetic input from pastoralist groups moving south from the Central Asian steppes. This is the Indo-European migration captured in DNA. But migration isn't invasion necessarily. The process appears gradual: intermarriage, cultural blending, shifting economic strategies. The Biamak people didn't vanish. They mixed, merged, and their distinctive cultural package was absorbed into new configurations. Trade reorientation played a role. The collapse of Indus Valley civilization to the south and Mesopotamian disruptions to the west broke trade networks. The oases that thrived as trade hubs lost their economic rationale when the partners collapsed. Climate may have contributed. Paleoclimate proxies suggest increasing aridity in Central Asia during the 2nd millennium BCE. Oasis agriculture depends on reliable water: springs, small rivers, wells. If water sources declined, settlements would have become unsustainable. By the time written records from Iran and India emerge, Vedic texts, Avestan texts, later Persian inscriptions, the BMAC is gone. The sites are ruins. The people have dispersed or assimilated. But the religious iconography, certain motifs, certain ritual practices persists. Scholars debate whether Bhimasi contributed to the development of Zoroastrianism, to Vedic religion, to shared Indo-Iranian traditions. The material culture influenced vast regions. Biamask-style seals appear in Mesopotamia. Biamask ceramics show up in the Indus Valley. This was a networked civilization, deeply integrated into Bronze Age trade and cultural exchange. And when the network collapsed, the nodes dissolved. From oases to oil lamps and brick ramparts. Clay tablets in Elamite script, a writing system unrelated to cuneiform, Akkadian, or Sumerian, though sometimes using cuneiform signs. Temple complexes at Susa, Anshan, Choga Zanbil, a rival to Mesopotamia for 3 millennia. And then silence. The official narrative treats Elam as Mesopotamia's perpetual enemy, always there to be conquered, always rebellious, always secondary, background antagonist in Assyrian and Babylonian epics. The dark reveal is longevity and erasure. Elamite civilization stretches from at least 3000 BCE to approximately 500 BCE, a span longer than ancient Egypt's dynastic period, multiple kingdoms, multiple capitals, periods of power and subjugation. And then the language stops being written. Elam's relationship with Mesopotamia was complex, sometimes allied, often at war, occasionally conquerors. Elamite kings sacked Babylon and carried off the stele of Hammurabi's law code. The Elamites had their own traditions, their language, unrelated to Semitic or Indo-European families, their religion, featuring deities like Inshushinak and Pinikir, their political structures, often emphasizing royal women's power in ways unusual for the region. But by the 7th century BCE, Assyrian military campaigns were systematically destroying Elamite power. Assyrian king Ashurbanipal's inscriptions boast of conquering Elamite cities, carrying off populations, desecrating shrines, and deliberately obliterating Elamite identity. One inscription, "I tore down the ziggurat of Susa, which was built of lapis lazuli-colored brick. I smashed its shining copper horns. I reduced the temples of Elam to naught. Their gods and goddesses I scattered to the winds. The tombs of their ancient and recent kings I devastated." Archaeological destruction layers at Susa confirm this. Major burning events in the 7th century BCE. Assyrian artifacts left as calling cards, but Elam didn't completely die then. A rump state persisted into the Achaemenid Persian period, 6th-4th centuries BCE. Elamite script continued being used for administrative purposes in the Persian Empire. Archives from Persepolis contain thousands of Elamite administrative tablets. However, as a prestige language and distinct cultural identity, Elamite was fading. Persian, Old Persian, and Aramaic became imperial languages. Greek became the administrative language after Alexander's conquest. By the Parthian period, 247 BCE, 224 CE, Elamite had disappeared from the written record. The language is partially deciphered. We can read royal names, some religious terms, and administrative vocabulary. But much remains opaque. Elamite literary texts, if they existed, haven't survived. We know Elam through Mesopotamian accounts and through palace archives. The Elamites' own historical narratives are lost. Genetic studies of modern Iranians don't show dramatic population replacement in ancient times. The people persisted, but cultural memory was overwritten. Persians inherited the Elamite heartland, absorbed remnants of Elamite administration, and built their empire on the bones of Elamite kingdoms. Power writes the archive. Power deletes it too. Raised field agriculture stretching across high-altitude plains. Stone gateways carved with intricate iconography. Monoliths standing in plazas at 3,800 meters elevation, where oxygen is thin and growing seasons are short. This is Tiwanaku, on the southern shore of Lake Titicaca in modern Bolivia, and it mastered one of the world's harshest agricultural environments. Until the climate shifted, the official narrative calls Tiwanaku an Andean state. Influential, yes, but eventually superseded by the Inca, a stepping stone in the progression toward the empire that Spanish conquistadors would encounter. The dark reveal is scale and collapse. Between approximately 500 and 1000 CE, Tiwanaku wasn't just a regional power. It was a sprawling empire influencing territories from the Bolivian highlands to coastal Chile to Amazonian lowlands. Population estimates for the capital range from 30,000 to 100,000, making it one of the largest pre-Columbian cities in South America. The raised field system was the foundation. In the high plains, Altiplano, around Lake Titicaca, flatland floods in rainy seasons and freezes in dry seasons. Standard agriculture fails, but raised fields, elevated planting surfaces separated by water-filled canals, solved the problem. The canals absorbed excess water during rains, moderated temperatures, water releases heat at night, protecting crops from frost, and provided habitat for fish and aquatic plants that could be harvested. Archaeological surveys have identified thousands of hectares of raised fields, linear ridges and canals covering the landscape. This system supported large populations in a marginal environment, and it required centralized coordination to construct and maintain. Tiwanaku's monumental architecture demonstrates organizational capacity. The Akapana Pyramid, a stepped platform structure, rises 17 meters and covers an area equivalent to several city blocks, built from massive sandstone blocks fitted without mortar. The Gateway of the Sun, carved from a single block of andesite, stands as testimony to stoneworking skill. But lake-level reconstructions tell a different story. Around 1000 CE, Lake Titicaca's water level dropped significantly. Sediment cores from the lake show this transition clearly. Shifts in diatom assemblages, algae species sensitive to water depth, changes in oxygen isotope ratios, and reduced lake extent. Lower lake levels meant reduced water availability for raised fields. Fields farther from water sources became unsustainable. Agricultural productivity declined. The system that fed Tiwanaku's population began failing. Isotopic analysis of human remains from Tiwanaku and surrounding sites shows dietary changes. Earlier populations relied heavily on maize and potatoes. Later populations show increased consumption of quinoa and tubers that tolerate harsher conditions. This is stress response in food. Regional breakup follows. Ceramic styles associated with Tiwanaku, polychrome vessels, with distinctive iconography, become less widespread. Local styles reassert themselves. The cultural homogeneity that marked Tiwanaku's imperial influence fragments. By 1100 CE, the capital is largely abandoned. Populations moved to smaller sites, often at higher elevations, where raised field agriculture wasn't necessary. The monumental center becomes a ruin. Inca accounts centuries later speak of Tiwanaku as ancient ruins from a past age, impressive, mysterious, but disconnected from living memory. Textile iconography tells part of the story. Tiwanaku textiles feature the staff god, a frontal figure holding staffs, often accompanied by profile attendants. This iconography spreads across the empire, appearing on textiles, pottery, and architecture. After the collapse, the iconography fragments, localizes, and eventually disappears. Modern excavations reveal planned abandonment in some contexts. Elite residences were ritually closed, doorways blocked, valuable items removed, offerings made before departure. This wasn't panicked flight. The leadership knew the system was failing and managed the decline. Dendroclimatic reconstructions from regional tree ring sequences confirm a sustained drought period between 950 to 1150 CE, coinciding with Tiwanaku's collapse. This wasn't a single bad year. This was a climate shift that made the raised field system unviable. North of Tiwanaku, another Andean web phrase. Roads connecting mountain valleys, storage complexes, kolkha filled with tribute goods, administrative centers imposing geometric architecture. This is the Wari Empire, predating the Inca by 500 years, covering much of Peru, and then disintegrating so thoroughly that the Inca didn't remember them. The official narrative, until recently, barely acknowledged Wari. They were middle horizon culture, archaeological jargon for we don't know what to call them. The Inca were the story. Wari was prologue. The dark reveal is bureaucratic collapse. From approximately 600–1000 CE, Wari operated as an empire, road networks, administrative hierarchy, tribute systems, craft specialization, and iconographic homogeneity across vast territories. They weren't nomadic raiders or loose confederations. They were imperial administrators. The capital, Huari, sat in the Ayacucho Valley at 2,800 meters elevation. The city covered 15 square kilometers and housed perhaps 40,000 people. Excavations reveal orthogonal, right-angle architecture, planned neighborhoods, monumental compounds, and specialized craft areas. This is urban planning on a massive scale. The Huari built roads, not trails. Engineered roads with bridges, retaining walls, and way stations. The Inca Great Road, Chapacñan, was built on Huari foundations. Recent remote sensing and archaeological surveys have identified hundreds of kilometers of Huari roads connecting highland and coastal sites. Storage was central. At Piquilacta, a Huari administrative center near Cusco, archaeologists have documented massive storage complexes. Hundreds of small rectangular structures designed to hold tribute goods, maize, dried meat, textiles, etc. This is empire as logistics. Collect goods from provinces, store them, redistribute to administrators and military. But dendroclimatic evidence reveals crisis. Tree ring sequences from Andean forests and oxygen isotope records from ice cores show severe drought clusters between 950 and 1100 CE. This is the same drought that destabilized Tiwanaku. Huari, despite its roads and storage, couldn't outlast environmental collapse. Storage collapse is visible archaeologically. At sites like Piquilacta, the Colca complexes show sudden abandonment. Roofs collapsed, goods depleted or removed, no gradual decline. The system emptied and stopped functioning. Regional breakups follow the pattern. Huari iconography, polychrome pottery with distinctive geometric and figurative designs, textiles with the split-eyed deity motif, fragments. Provincial centers start producing local styles. The cultural homogeneity dissolves. Here's what makes Huari nuclear: the silence. The Inca, who built their empire over former Huari territories, don't mention them. Inca origin myths speak of emerging from caves, of founder kings, of conquests, but not of finding ruins of an earlier empire. Either the Inca genuinely forgot, or they deliberately excluded Huari from their historical narratives. Spanish. Chronicles, written after the conquest, occasionally mention ruins older than the Inca, structures whose builders were unknown even to indigenous informants. Archaeologists in the 20th century realized these ruins were Huari. Textile analysis provides insights. Huari textiles are masterworks, complex weave structures, vivid dyes, iconography conveying political and religious messages. But textile production requires specialized labor, access to raw materials, camelid wool, cotton, and elite patronage. When the empire collapsed, textile production decentralized. Later, textiles are simpler, less standardized. The Huari didn't leave writing. They left architecture, pottery, textiles, and roads. These materials speak bureaucratic language: organization, hierarchy, tribute, redistribution. And then the bureaucracy melts. No invasion destroyed Huari. No epidemic swept the empire. The climate changed, agricultural productivity declined, tribute stopped flowing, and the administrative network unraveled. Provincial elites stopped obeying the capital. Local populations stopped paying tribute. The center couldn't hold, and it dissolved. By 1100 CE, Huari was abandoned. The roads fell into disrepair. The storage complexes stood empty. The iconography faded, and within a few generations, memory faded too. Bureaucracy melts without a firestorm. The silence is administrative. Hittites fell with letters in hand. Huari fell with ledgers in warehouses. Stelae carved with dated inscriptions, monuments marking calendrical cycles, royal anniversaries, military victories, palaces with corbelled vaults, painted murals depicting court life, cities housing tens of thousands in the rainforest lowlands. And then, between 750 and 900 CE, the writing stops. The official narrative calls it the classic Maya collapse, a cautionary tale about environmental overreach, overpopulation, deforestation, drought. Civilizations that grow too fast, crash. Simple. The dark reveal is complexity and specificity. The Maya civilization didn't end in 900 CE. Maya people persisted. Cities continued in northern Yucatan, and the Spanish conquistadors in the 16th century encountered Maya kingdoms. What collapsed were specific lowland polities: Tikal, Copan, Palenque, Calakmul, Dos Pilas, and dozens of others that depopulated, stopped carving monuments, and whose palaces were abandoned. The timeline is chilling. Stela dates, inscriptions recording dates in the Maya long count calendar, show when each city stopped carving. Copan's last dated monument, 822 CE. Tikal's last, 869 CE. The cessation isn't simultaneous, but it's clustered. Within 150 years, the great centers of the southern lowlands go silent. Speleothem records, stalagmites from caves in the Maya lowlands, provide high-resolution paleoclimate data. Oxygen isotopes in stalagmite calcite reflect precipitation. The data shows severe, multi-decadal droughts between 750 to 900 CE, with peaks around 810, 860, and 910 CE. These aren't normal dry years. These are mega-droughts, sustained periods of significantly below normal rainfall. Maya agriculture was rain-dependent. They didn't have large-scale irrigation systems. They relied on seasonal rainfall to fill reservoirs, aguadas, and to water maize fields. When the rains failed for years or decades, water storage couldn't compensate. Maize isotope stress appears in human skeletal remains. Carbon isotope ratios in bones and teeth reflect diet. Studies of burial populations from collapse-era contexts show declining maize consumption and increasing consumption of wild plants, markers of nutritional stress and agricultural failure. But drought isn't the whole story. Warfare intensified. Fortifications appear at multiple sites in the 8th, 9th centuries. Defensive walls, moats, palisades, all indicating threat. Epigraphy, the study of inscriptions, reveals increasing references to warfare, captive-taking, and elite conflict. At Dos Pilas, a mid-sized Maya city, the sequence is dramatic. Around 760 CE, the city's palace complexes were hastily fortified by tearing apart earlier monuments and using the stones to build defensive walls. The effort failed. The city was attacked, burned, and abandoned. The residents fled to a nearby hilltop, where they built a makeshift refuge. That too was abandoned within a generation. Political overreach is visible. Some Maya polities expanded their territories, demanding tribute and labor from subjugated centers. But when environmental stress hit, the tribute networks fractured. Subjugated cities rebelled or simply stopped paying. Overextended polities couldn't maintain control. Palace abandonments are archaeologically detectable. Excavations at Tikal show the royal palace falling into disrepair, roofs collapsing, rooms being filled with debris, no evidence of maintenance or occupation. Elite residential compounds show similar patterns. The leadership class either left or lost the resources to maintain their lifestyles. But here's the haunting part. The writing stops mid-sentence, not literally, but conceptually. Maya writing was primarily used to record royal lineages, political events, and ritual calendars. When centralized political authority collapsed, there was no one to commission monuments, no scribes employed by royalty, no reason to maintain the tradition. Some cities stopped carving dated monuments almost in unison. History cuts mid-sentence. The last dated stela at Tikal was carved in 869 CE. What happened next? We don't know. The texts don't say. The system that created the texts was gone. But northern Maya cities, Uxmal, Chichen Itza, Mayaphan, continued and even flourished during the terminal classic and post-classic periods. The Maya script continued being used. The civilization persisted. It's specifically the southern lowland palace economies that collapsed. Recent remote sensing using LIDAR, light detection and ranging technology, has revealed the full scale of classic Maya urbanism. Cities were far larger than previously thought. Massive residential sprawl, intensive agriculture, road networks connecting centers. The carrying capacity was pushed to its limits. Population estimates for the southern lowlands during the classic period range from 1 to 10 million people. After the collapse, populations dropped by 80–90%. This isn't extinction, its abandonment and dispersal. People left the cities and moved to smaller settlements, to the highlands, to the coasts. The rainforest reclaimed the ruins. Within decades, trees grew through plazas, vines covered palaces. The core-belled vaults collapsed. For 1,000 years, the great Maya cities were swallowed by jungle. History cuts mid-sentence when the institutions that write history collapse, from rainforest to rice plain mega-hydraulics. LiDAR reveals a city larger than any medieval European capital. Canals, reservoirs, barrays, hydraulic networks lacing through hundreds of square kilometers of urban sprawl. Stone temples rising from jungle, Angkor Wat, Bayon, Ta, Prom, monuments to gods and kings. And then the capital moves, the infrastructure fails, and the jungle takes it. The official narrative says Thai invasions ended Angkor. In 1431 CE, Ayutthaya armies sacked the city. The Khmer court fled, and Angkor was abandoned. Simple conquest narrative. The dark reveal is hydraulic fragility. From the 9th to 15th centuries, Angkor was the capital of the Khmer Empire, dominating mainland Southeast Asia. The city's population at its peak may have reached 750,000 to 1 million, making it one of the largest pre-industrial cities in the world. The hydraulic system was Angkor's foundation and its vulnerability. The city sat in a low-lying plain prone to seasonal flooding from the monsoon. The Khmer engineered an elaborate water management system. Massive barrays, the West Baray covers 16 square kilometers. Canals, embankments, and distribution networks that captured monsoon water, stored it, and distributed it for agriculture, drinking water, and symbolic religious purposes. The system worked for centuries, but it was rigid. It required constant maintenance, and it was vulnerable to extremes. LiDAR mapping, conducted from 2012 onward, has revolutionized understanding of Angkor's urban extent. The city wasn't just the famous temple complexes, it was sprawling suburbs, rice fields, roads, and neighborhoods covering over 1,000 square kilometers. The population density and infrastructure scale exceeded any medieval European city, but the dendroclimatic data tells a darker story. Tree ring analysis and climate proxies show extreme monsoon variability in the 14th, 15th centuries, severe droughts followed by intense flooding events. The Angkor hydraulic system couldn't handle the extremes. Geoarchaeology of the canal systems shows failure modes. Canals that were designed for predictable seasonal flows became clogged with sediment during extreme floods. Embankments breached, reservoirs overfilled and washed out downstream infrastructure. The system, designed for reliability, proved fragile when faced with climate volatility. Excavations in canal bottoms reveal flood scour scars, evidence of high-energy water flow that stripped canal linings and damaged infrastructure. Repairing such damage would have required massive labor mobilization. If the damage was repeated yearly or every few years, repairs couldn't keep pace. Inscriptional gaps tell the political story. The last major temple construction at Angkor was Bayon, completed in the early 13th century. After that, monumental building declines. Inscriptions become less frequent. The steady stream of royal dedications, construction projects, and commemorative stelae thins and stops. By the late 14th century, Angkor was experiencing political instability. Wars with Ayutthaya, the rising Thai kingdom to the west, drained resources. But the Thai invasions were symptoms, not causes. A city of 750,000 doesn't collapse because one army sacks it. It collapses when the infrastructure sustaining it fails. The capital relocates. In the mid-15th century, the Khmer court moved to Phnom Penh, near the Tonle Sap and Mekong River, a location with better access to water trade routes and less vulnerable to overextended hydraulic infrastructure. Angkor didn't die. The political center moved and the city was left to decay. But Angkor Wat, the famous temple, remained in use. Buddhist monks maintained the temple continuously from the 15th century onward. It never became lost to locals, but the urban sprawl, the hydraulic networks, the suburbs, all were abandoned. The jungle reclaimed the city fast. Tropical environments are aggressive. Trees grew through courtyards. Vines engulfed walls. The jungle figs, Tetrameles nudiflora, at Ta Prohm Temple are famous now, massive trees growing through temple structures, their roots literally pulling the buildings apart. But they are also testimony to abandonment. These trees are centuries old, meaning the temple was already abandoned when they germinated. Western rediscovery in the 19th century found Angkor swallowed by jungle. French colonists, archaeologists, and explorers encountered a city consumed by vegetation, temples barely visible through greenery, canals filled with sediment and vegetation, roads lost to forest. Modern conservation efforts struggle. The same monsoon rains that fed Angkor's hydraulics now erode the sandstone temples. Tourism pressures stress fragile structures. Climate change brings unpredictable rainfall, compounding preservation challenges. Recent studies using remote sensing have identified failed infrastructure, canal sections that were started but never completed, embankment projects abandoned mid-construction. These are markers of a society losing capacity to maintain its complexity. The Khmer Empire continued, just not at Angkor. The kingdom persisted through various capitals until French colonization in the 19th century. But Angkor, the great water city, the urban sprawl that rivaled anything in the medieval world, was finished. The biggest systems leave the biggest ruins and the sharpest silences. Volcanic cliffs dropping to Pacific swells. Moai, massive stone statues, standing on Ahu platforms, backs to the ocean, watching the interior. This is Rapa Nui, Easter Island, and it's become a parable about environmental collapse. But the real story is more complex and more human. The official narrative says Rapa Nui destroyed itself. Polynesians arrived around 1200 CE, clear-cut the forests to move Moai, overpopulated, depleted resources, and collapsed into warfare and cannibalism before Europeans arrived to find a barren island with a handful of survivors. Ecocide. Cautionary tale. Simple. The dark reveal is revisionism. Pollen cores from lake sediments show dramatic deforestation. Palm forests that once covered the island disappeared between 1200 1650 CE. Charcoal influx in sediment cores indicates increased burning. Soil chemistry shows erosion and nutrient depletion. The environmental impact is real. But recent archaeology complicates the narrative. The population peak may have been lower than earlier estimates suggested, perhaps 3,000, 4,000, rather than 15,000. The society did undergo stress and transformation around 1500 for 1680 CE. Moai production stopped, statues were toppled, and settlement patterns changed. But this was restructuring, not apocalypse. Moai transport traces, roads worn by dragging stones, show sophisticated engineering. The statues were walked upright using ropes, a technique that didn't require massive deforestation, as earlier theories claimed. Recent experiments have demonstrated the technique's feasibility. The environmental changes were real, but they triggered social adaptation, not societal suicide. The society shifted from chiefdoms centered on Moai construction to warrior-based clan systems. Obsidian mata'a, spear points, become more common, indicating increased warfare, or at least martial culture. The Birdman cult, associated with ritual competition at Orongo, may have emerged as an alternative social structure after Moai-based systems failed. But here's the real devastation: contact. When Europeans arrived in 1722, diseases followed. In the 1860s, Peruvian slave raiders abducted much of the population. By the 1870s, only about 100 Rapa Nui people survived. The cultural collapse was colonial, not environmental. Modern population genetics shows that contemporary Rapa Nui descend from the pre-contact population, but with significant European and other Polynesian admixture. The pre-contact culture, language, oral traditions, religious practices, was severely damaged by disease, slavery, and colonization. The lesson of Rapa Nui isn't humans destroy environments and then die. It's island societies face constrained resources, adapt social structures, and are vulnerable to external shocks. Islands are laboratories, continents are slower experiments. Cliff dwellings carved into canyon walls. Kivas, circular underground ceremonial rooms built into stone. Pottery with black-on-white geometric designs. This is Mesa Verde, Chaco Canyon, the Four Corners region of the American Southwest, and around 1300 CE, people left. The official narrative calls them the Anasazi, a Navajo term meaning ancient enemies or ancient ones, though contemporary Pueblo peoples prefer ancestral Puebloans. The narrative says they mysteriously disappeared, vanished, gone. The dark reveal is migration, not disappearance. The people didn't vanish, they moved, and we know where. Tree ring drought chronology from the region provides year-by-year climate data going back centuries. The late 13th century, 1275 to 1300 CE, was marked by severe drought. The Great Drought, as dendroclimatologists call it, made maize agriculture increasingly unreliable. Mesa Verde and other cliff-dwelling sites show room abandonment in the late 1200s. Excavations reveal that structures were sealed, doorways blocked, valuable items removed, rooms emptied systematically. This is planned relocation, not panicked flight. But there's also evidence of stress. Skeletal remains from late occupation periods show nutritional stress, increased violence, cranial trauma, and demographic instability. Not apocalypse, but hardship. Where did they go? The Rio Grande Valley in New Mexico, Hopi Mesas in Arizona, Zuni Pueblo, Ancestral Pueblo, and ceramic styles and architectural techniques appear in these regions in the early 14th century, coinciding with abandonment of the Four Corners sites. Oral traditions from modern Pueblo peoples speak of migrations, clans moving from the north and west, seeking better lands, integrating with existing populations. Chaco Canyon, the great center of earlier periods, 900–1150 CE, had already been abandoned before the 13th century drought. Its massive great houses, multi-story structures like Pueblo Bonito with over 600 rooms, were built during a wetter period. When climate shifted, the population dispersed. Recent research emphasizes continuity, not collapse. Ancestral Puebloans didn't vanish. Their descendants are the modern Pueblo peoples of New Mexico and Arizona, Hopi, Zuni, Acoma, Taos, and others. The language, the pottery traditions, the ceremonial practices all persist. But the specific sites, the cliff dwellings, the great houses, were abandoned. The architecture remains, empty and haunting, preserved by the arid southwest climate. Ritual landscapes persisted elsewhere. Katsina religion, masked ceremonial dances representing ancestral spirits, may have emerged during or after this migration period, providing social cohesion for relocated populations. Drought as metronome, from Hittites to Wari. And here again, in the southwest, climate as the driver of profound social change. Caravan kingdoms. Incense routes from Oman and Yemen to Mediterranean markets. The Marib Dam, a massive earthen barrier controlling wadi flow, irrigating fields, sustaining a population in the Arabian desert. And then the dam fails. The official narrative treats pre-Islamic Arabia as a footnote, tribal, marginal, culturally overshadowed by Rome, Persia, and later Islam. The Sabians, if mentioned at all, are the Queen of Sheba and little else. The dark reveal is hydraulic kingship. From approximately 1000 BCE to 600 CE, the Sabian kingdom and its successor states controlled southwestern Arabia, wealthy from incense trade, frankincense and myrrh, and agriculture sustained by sophisticated water management. The Marib Dam was ancient engineering marvel. First constructed around 8th century BCE, it was repeatedly expanded and repaired over the centuries. The structure controlled seasonal wadi flows, flash floods from mountain runoff, diverting water into irrigation canals that watered fields covering thousands of hectares. Inscriptions record royal sponsorship of dam repairs, emphasizing the king's role as water provider. But the dam required constant maintenance. Seasonal floods stressed the structure, sediment accumulated, breaches happened periodically and were repaired until they weren't. Inscriptions from the late 5th and early 6th centuries CE record increasingly desperate dam repairs. One inscription mentions the dam breaking and being rebuilt at great expense. Another records a major breach. The final catastrophic failure occurred around 570 CE. The traditional date, though scholarly debate continues. Sedimentology at the breach site shows high energy flow. a massive outburst flood that would have destroyed downstream fields and settlements. The irrigation system collapsed. The agricultural base disappeared. Trade routes, meanwhile, were shifting. Red Sea shipping, increasingly dominated by Aksumite, Ethiopian, and later Byzantine interests, bypassed Arabian overland routes. The incense trade, while still valuable, was no longer the economic driver it had been. Geopolitical shifts, wars between Byzantines and Persians, the rise of Christianity reducing demand for incense and pagan rituals, undercut Sabaean prosperity. By the time Islam emerged in the 7th century, Sabaean political structures had collapsed. The region was fractured, ruled by local clans and contested by outside powers. Aksum, Persia. The Prophet Muhammad's armies encountered a fragmented Arabia, not a unified kingdom. The Marib Dam ruins remain visible for centuries, a monument to past engineering, slowly eroding. Modern Yemen rebuilt a dam at Marib in the 1980s, using modern engineering. The ancient structure is partially preserved as an archaeological site. Water ends empires quietly. Iron ends them suddenly. The Sabians experienced both, hydraulic failure and military conquest. Terracotta heads emerging from eroded gullies, faces with elaborate hairstyles, stylized features, detailed jewelry, iron smelting furnaces, slag heaps, and bloomery sites. This is the Nok culture in central Nigeria, and they pioneered iron technology in sub-Saharan Africa and then vanished from the archaeological record. The official narrative barely existed until the mid-20th century. West African prehistory was understudied, undervalued, dismissed. The Nok were discovered by accident, terracotta heads found by tin miners in the 1940s. The dark reveal is sophistication and disappearance. From approximately 1000 BCE to 300 CE, the Nok culture flourished in what is now Nigeria. They worked iron, some of the earliest evidence of iron metallurgy in West Africa, possibly developed independently or transmitted from North Africa. They created elaborate terracotta sculptures, portrait heads, full figures, animals, with a distinctive style that influenced later West African art traditions. Thermoluminescence dating of the terracotta sculptures places them between 1000 BCE and 300 CE. The technology measures when clay was last fired, providing direct dates for the artwork. Slag fields and furnace sites indicate intensive iron production. The Nok weren't dabbling in metallurgy. They were producing tools, weapons, and implements on a significant scale. But the details of their society, political organization, settlement patterns, subsistence strategies, remain poorly understood. Why? Because Nok sites have been looted extensively. The terracotta heads are valuable on the antiquities market. Illegal excavation has destroyed archaeological contexts, erasing information about the culture that created them. What we know comes from salvage archaeology, excavations at sites threatened by development or erosion. These reveal settlement hiatuses around 300 CE. Nok sites show abandonment or population decline. The distinctive terracotta tradition ends. Explanations are speculative. Environmental change, shifts in rainfall patterns, could have stressed agriculture. Disease outbreaks or demographic collapse are possible but unverifiable. Social reorganization or migration would leave minimal archaeological trace. The dispersal model is most likely. The people didn't vanish. They moved, mixed with other populations, and their distinctive cultural markers, the terracotta style, specific ironworking techniques, were abandoned or transformed. The influence persists. Later, West African sculptural traditions, If, Benin, and others, show artistic continuities with Nok. The ironworking knowledge spread across West Africa, contributing to later state formation. Ghana, Mali, Songhai empires all depended on iron tools and weapons. But Nok itself, the culture that created those haunting terracotta faces, is gone from the record. A broken terracotta eye stares from eroded gullies, testimony to artistry without archaeology. One last ghost city to close the scene circle. Legends speak of giants, the Harla people, builders of massive stone walls, inhabitants of ancient cities, vanished into myth. Local traditions in eastern Ethiopia describe ruins as cities of giants, too grand to have been built by ordinary humans. The official narrative dismissed these as folklore. Ethiopia's highlands, rich in archaeology, received scholarly attention. The eastern lowlands, harsh and remote, were ignored. The dark reveal came in the 21st century. Starting in 2015, archaeological surveys and excavations in the Harla region near Harar revealed a substantial medieval city, 10th–15th centuries CE, engaged in long-distance trade with cosmopolitan connections and evidence of sophisticated urban life. Harla, the archaeological site, yielded imported ceramics from Egypt, China, India, and the Maldives, glass beads from South Asia, cowrie shells used as currency, coinage from Islamic sultanates. This was a trade hub connected to Indian Ocean networks, engaged in commerce spanning continents. The site also produced evidence of craft production, glassmaking, jewelry manufacture, textile production. The population was multi-ethnic, multi-religious, with Islamic influence evident in burial practices and material culture. And then, around the 15th century, the city declined. Radiocarbon dates on final occupation layers suggest abandonment by 1500 CE. The region experienced political upheaval. The Adal Sultanate, which controlled much of the Horn of Africa, warred with Christian Ethiopian kingdoms. Trade routes shifted. Regional aridity, reconstructed from lake cores and historical sources, may have stressed agriculture. The city was abandoned. The ruins eroded. Stone walls, built from local basalt, collapsed into rubble. Sediment buried occupation layers. Within generations, memory transformed into legend. The giants weren't mythical. They were people who built substantial stone architecture in a region where later populations lived in less permanent structures. The scale impressed, and impression became myth. Modern excavations are revealing the reality. Harla was part of a broader network of East African Islamic trade cities connecting interior regions to coastal ports. When the trade networks contracted due to Portuguese disruption of Indian Ocean trade in the 16th century, due to political instability, due to environmental stress, the interior cities lost their economic rationale. The people dispersed. Some probably migrated to Harar, which became a major Islamic center. Others integrated into regional populations. The material culture, the imports, the craft traditions, the urban layout disappeared. From Indus drains to Harla workshops, systems fail, people move, memory edits. The planet is covered in ghost cities. Some are famous ruins. Others are forgotten until a shovel turns the soil and objects whisper their presence. 30 disappearances, different latitudes, the same choreography. Climate lashes, monsoons fail, rivers shift, droughts persist, floods erase. Trade pivots. When the Silk Road moves, the oasis dies. When ships bypass Petra, the incense kingdoms hollow out. Conquerors rename. Lycia becomes Greek, becomes Roman, becomes Turkish, and the Lycian language dies in the margin of someone else's ledger. Priests rebury, Göbekli Tepe's pillars, deliberately covered, Sangsingdui's bronzes, ritually broken. Engineers miscalculate, Liangju's dams breach, Angkor's canals silt, Cahokia's floods multiply. Populations vote with their feet. The Indus people leave mid-task. Wari's provinces stop paying tribute. The Maya lowlands empty as people scatter to highlands, coasts, anywhere with water. The earth takes back the bricks. Jungle roots through plazas. Sand drifts through doorways. Soil chemistry loses the signature of human occupation, layer by layer, until archaeologists with trowels and radiocarbon dating scrape back the amnesia. The pattern is not apocalypse, it's amnesia. Civilizations do not end. They unspool, merge, and are mislabeled until a trowel corrects the caption. The people persist in genes, in descendant cultures, in linguistic traces, in traditions transmitted across generations who forgot the original context. What vanishes is the system, the palace economy, the hydraulic state, the trade network, the cultural identity. We remember Egypt because the desert preserved its tombs. We forget the Indus Valley because monsoons dissolved its mud brick and its script stayed silent. We remember Rome because it wrote everything down, and later Europeans fetched that writing from monastery libraries. We forget Wari because the Inca didn't record them, and the Spanish arrived too late to hear the old stories. Memory is selective. Power writes the archive. Losers get footnotes or oblivion. And yet, here we are, cataloging the vanished, resurrecting the forgotten, giving names to the nameless. Archaeology is a kind of resurrection, not complete, not perfect, but enough to prove they existed, enough to say, you mattered, your cities were real, your engineering was sophisticated, your art was beautiful, your collapse was neither inevitable nor meaningless. The question turns inward. What will our ruins say about pipelines and reservoirs, supply chains and ledgers, when the wind moves through our empty courtyards? Will future archaeologists uncover our server farms, those massive data centers consuming rivers of electricity and water, and puzzle over what rituals required such energy? Will they find our plastic and geological strata and name an epoch after it? Will they excavate suburbs and wonder why we built houses so far from food sources, connected by ribbons of decayed asphalt? Will they read our archives, if any survive, and ask why we knew climate was changing, knew resources were finite, knew systems were fragile and did so little? Or will they simply note the abandonment, the population dispersal, the cessation of monumental construction, and add us to the catalog of civilizations that unspooled when conditions shifted? The Indus engineers understood drainage, the Maya understood astronomy, the Khmer understood hydraulics. All were sophisticated, none were eternal. We are not special. We are another experiment in complexity, running in real time, discovering through experience what the archaeological record has been screaming. Systems fail, climate shifts, resources deplete, networks collapse, people adapt or migrate, and memory, unless deliberately preserved, fades fast. But here's the hope embedded in these stories. The people survived, not the empires, not the palaces, not always the languages or the religions or the political structures, but the people carrying seeds, techniques, stories, genes, moved on. They rebuilt, they adapted, they created new configurations. Collapse is not extinction, it's transformation. Often traumatic, always costly, but not necessarily terminal. So, what's your take on this history? Which case hit hardest? The clean exit of the Indus, where people just left mid-task. The Hittite tablets, half-baked in burning archives. The Jomon, whose 14,000-year continuity melted in centuries. The Maya, whose history cuts mid-sentence. Or Angkor, where the most sophisticated hydraulic city on Earth drowned and dried simultaneously. Drop your thoughts below. Every perspective keeps these stories alive after time tried to erase them. We're doing what archaeologists do, resurrecting memory one shard at a time, one radiocarbon date at a time, refusing to let complexity vanish into silence. If you want more buried history, more civilizations that textbooks skip, more patterns in the ruins, more conversations with the dead, you know where to find it. Until then, remember the forgotten. Question the official narratives, and pay attention to what the Earth tries to tell us through the empty cities it's slowly reclaiming.